All right, we're going to call the meeting to order, and our remaining members will wander in and join us as they arrive, as flights arrive. So let me officially call our CPAG meeting to order and turn things over to Eileen Strauss. Called her State Board study session to order.
So good morning. So I am calling the State Board study session to order, except that I'm the only State Board member here. So I am clearly representing the State Board as liaison to CPAG, and want to personally thank all of you for making the time to come here this morning and to work with us on these issues. It's really important work to us and will help advise us as we move forward. And so I will be reporting back to the State Board as part of this work. So again, I want to thank everyone for being here, and I am officially representing the State Board of Education.
Thank you, Eileen. You'll be studying hard enough for everyone. All right, why don't we stand for the flag salute? Susan, do you want to lead us in the flag salute?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, just a quick overview of the agenda. I'm sure you all had a chance to glance at it in advance, and you'll see that we're counting in a slightly different order today. We'll be doing item 1, and then we'll follow that with items 4, 3, and then 2, 5, and 6 based on presenter availability. But your agenda is organized in that order, so should be easy to follow. Just a couple of announcements. First, a couple congratulations to in absentia. We can congratulate Karen Valdez. Unfortunately, she'll be leaving us on CPAG, but fortunately, because she'll be joining the State Board of Education. So we're really excited for her and send our congratulations via the broadcast of this meeting. And also, congratulations to Susan Salcido, the new superintendent of Santa Barbara County. Congratulations. It's great news. The county offices, we know, are on the front lines of this work. So I'm glad you're here, and I'm sure it will really you'll be able to contribute even at a level even more than you could before. It'll be very meaningful. And I want to welcome Glenn Price, the Chief Deputy Superintendent, who's sitting with us on the dais this morning. Welcome. We're glad you're here. And I know you're going to introduce our new staff folks to us.
Yes. Well, thank you, Madam Chair. It's really an honor to be here. And as we go forward, we're going to be staffing CPAG from my office, the Office of the Chief Deputy, and really want to thank everybody who's worked so hard to make this meeting come together. As I do that, want to apologize for getting the materials out late. We're going to be working on getting that smoother and getting them to you on a more advanced basis. Would like in that regard too to ask all of our speakers today to kind of take things a little bit slow as we work through the items. You know, most of them are accompanied by some very simply laid out PowerPoint slides that will allow us to track along with the handout. So ask for your indulgence on that, and I think we'll be able to work through it by going through things slowly and taking it systematically. Super exciting day. Also want to thank you on behalf of the State Superintendent. I had a chance to review the agenda with him last night, and it's just emblematic of the incredible work that's going on in the state of California, the kinds of issues that we'll be addressing today, and looking forward to, as Board Member Strauss mentioned, to all the great input that we're going to be receiving. All of this would not have been possible without some really significant staff work, and I particularly want to thank Amber Alexander, Dave Sapp, and Leilani Alginato from the State Board Office, and then Jacqueline Matranga, and from our is Jacqueline? Yeah, there she is right there. Where's your hand? From CDE. And as our chair mentioned, our primary staff person for this work going forward is the amazing Jacqueline Ollison. And could you raise your hand? So can we give them all a round of applause for all the work that's gone into moving this forward. It does take a whole Department of Education and State Board of Education staff team to get all these materials going, and we really appreciate all the strong collaboration and teamwork. And of course, we'll be hearing from other staff as we move through the agenda today. So thanks to all of you for being here, for giving of your most precious resource, your time, and I think we're looking forward to a really exciting day today.
All right. So before we begin the agenda, just so we have a layout of the day, we'll be following our usual format. So we'll be working through our agenda items. We have a working lunch break built in, and we'll stop at points along the way to take a small formal break. But as you need to, just give me a nod, and if we need to do it sooner, we will. All right. Any other items from the group before we begin with our first agenda item? All right, so let's move to agenda item 1, an update on the dashboard.
Morning, CPAG members. Cindy Kazanis with the Analysis, Measurement, and Accountability Reporting Division. And today I brought a friend. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Good morning, Jeff Brashears with the Local Agency System Support Office.
Great. And so we are going to toggle between the PowerPoint presentation that was posted and some websites, including the California School Dashboard. So I am pleased to announce that since you last met, the dashboard has been released quite successfully. And we've gotten a lot of great feedback. We got great feedback during our private preview, and we got great feedback once it was launched. Because we are, there's lots of commotion in the back, because we're dedicated to continuous improvement, this field test period, we are continuing to look for additional input to inform what the dashboard will look like come this fall. So without further ado, I just want to bring up, I'm going to bring up the PowerPoint, which is, I have to pull it down from your website. I apologize. I didn't see it. It'll come up. Okay, so as I mentioned, we are going to we're going to talk a little bit more about the dashboard release, give you a couple of updates. I'm going to share with you some CD resources that have since been posted, even as recently as the last couple of days. And Jeff will cover the relationship between the dashboard and the local control and accountability plan. We will preview for you some State Board of Education topics that they will be looking at, which means you'll be looking at them as well in the coming months. And then finally, we'll close out with what we anticipate for the fall 2017 release. So the California School Dashboard, as I mentioned, was released last month. One of the criticisms that we received, and I say this up front, is that the data years are a bit old for some of the data points. And so we have this disclaimer on the homepage about that the data was the most recently available as of fall 2016, but we are thinking about ways in which we can display the data once you get into the system differently, or provide some other resources more readily. Under our resources tab, actually, we got a recommendation to pull some stuff out of our technical manual to make it more user-friendly, to see what's going to be next year used, so fall of 2017. So those are, I would say, to be upfront, that has been the most widely criticized piece on the dashboard. But overall, I think folks are finding it pretty user-friendly, which was the goal, right? Easy to use. They can get a lot of information about their school, about their district, in a very easy to use manner. We do have loaded on here, you can see there's the 3 tabs. The Fast Start Guide is the 1-pager that is translated. The Getting to Know the Dashboard on the far right-hand side is a 2-pager, and that's as well, it's been translated into Spanish. And then we have a video tutorial. And so all of these resources, we need to think about how we're going to sort of mix it up come fall because we're going to need to refresh the site. So we're already thinking about what fall looks like. Oops. So as far as what are the latest updates on the dashboard, we did make available through a one-click the college career indicator. The piece of the college career indicator I think people are most interested in, which is the Smarter Balanced Grade 11 scores. And so I can go into the dashboard, and I will go into the dashboard in just a moment, and we can look at how that is displayed. We will see come the end of the month, since we're in mid-April, under the detailed reports, how many students in the college and career indicator are not prepared, approaching prepared, and prepared. So you'll see that breakdown in the college, for the college career indicator, again in the detailed reports that'll be released at the end of the month. Because the grade 11 results, I wanted to make sure they're not based on distance from level 3, they're based on performance level results. So it's just a nuance that I wanted to make you aware of. I'm going to finish out what has been updated in the dashboard, and then we'll actually go into the dashboard. So let me finish out this slide. So for English learners only and reclassified English fluent proficient RFEPs, we did add that data per a request of not only our work group, but I know this group had an opinion about that as well. And so I think that the feedback that we've gotten initially on that is folks really liked what they saw. They actually see the status and change for that group too, which I'm not sure that people thought that they were going to see. It does not include a performance category, of course, but the disaggregated data is there. So with that, let's go into the dashboard and see what comes up on Google, because we had been trending pretty high. Well, we're in big today. All right, we're at the top. That's great. First day or two, we had over 30,000 hits, at least on the first day. I know that we've been trending really high on our own website, which is great. We know that people are using this resource, whether it be school districts or parents or community or media outlets, because we have gotten a lot of press over this as well. So would one of you like to volunteer your school district, or should I pick one that's local? Would you? Okay. John? Monrovia. Did you want to give us a preview? Were there any surprises?
Yeah, there are a few surprises.
Okay. We're working off of a wireless connection, so I apologize if this seems to be taking longer than I'm used to, too. And John, I'm spelling that right, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Okay, well, maybe we'll try a different school district just in case. I don't know what's going on. It's not like the search function. You think it's the connection? I'm on private. It's not loading.
Sorry about that.
This is what Glenn meant by going slow.
Glenn meant by going slow.
Okay. Well, I will go and
All right, so
I'll be right back.
we'll stay off the internet for now. So it's always good to have hard copies of what you're going to present. All right. We'll see if we can get back on after we're done with the last part of it. So for the dashboard updates, what has been released is the ability for districts to input information in a narrative box. And somebody told me it's actually not a box. So you shouldn't look for a box. You should look for a narrative at the bottom of a school district's homepage, the equity report. And a local district that the superintendent visited this week was Woodland Joint Unified. And I noticed that they did have a narrative. So that's a great example of a district to look at who has utilized this functionality. It was meant to simply provide local context. So there's not a lot of room to put a narrative. There are some districts I noticed that have said, please look at our website, our school, our district website for more information on what we think about the dashboard or how we're using the dashboard. So folks are using it for different purposes. At this point, it is text only, no hyperlinks, but there is a way to put in, obviously, a website address, just not to hyperlink it. And the other thing that is on there is at the board meeting in March, there was a request by the board to return to the definition or the ratings for local indicators of met, not met, and not met for 2 or more years. At one point, we had data reported, data not reported for 2 or more years, and several members, including Member Strauss, had some very strong opinions about that change was not in keeping with the spirit of what they had approved. So that was returned back to the original language, and the local indicator functionality has been released to our dashboard coordinators to start to get used to the functionality. And when the detailed reports go live later this month, so will the local indicator ratings and the local indicator functionality. So we are just a couple weeks off from really having the entire site fully functional. I can take questions right now if there's any about what the site, how it's currently functioning. If there's any questions about things that we've added since we last spoke to you. Any surprises? John? Not? Cameron?
On the local indicators, I just had a question. For the basics, the facilities, credentialed teachers, and instructional materials, will that be something that has to come to a public board meeting like the other local indicators to qualify for the met, not met, or will it somehow go through the SARC in a different way?
No, that it still is the requirement to go to that information being presented to the board at a regular scheduled meeting, yes.
Okay, and my understanding is it's not required for 17-18, but you guys are heavily suggesting it.
It's not required for 16-17 this year. It will be required for 17-18 no sooner than December 1st for the local indicators.
Okay, so it's not, doesn't need to be done necessarily before you post in November, but it needs to be, or it does?
It'll be, there will be a date specific in the fall of 17-18, no sooner than December 1st, and those local indicators will be reported at that time. You're welcome.
Other questions? Oh, well, Monrovia came up. Thank you, Jacqueline, for your help. And as you can see, this is a unified school district. So they have performance categories for all the indicators that are populated at this time, which with the exception of chronic absenteeism, which we'll collect for the first time this summer, and then the college career. So you have 2 for all student performance that are in green, and then 3 that are in yellow. And you can see that of the total student groups for each of those categories, there are different numbers of student groups that fit in. So that this is a great district to show how the dashboard works as far as looking at number of student groups per the population of students, either at the elementary school level or in the high school level. For student groups in red or orange, it looks like only for your assessments that you need to really focus on that area. For suspension rate, English learner progress, and graduation rate, there are no student groups in red or orange. Is there one that I should dive into that? at the high school level. So if we look at graduation rate, okay, graduation rate, as you can see, they have 416 students, and that 416 students then is disaggregated by the different program areas and then the different race ethnicities. So they don't have, this is a great example of what they don't have statistically significant groups of numbers rather of American Indians. There's only 2, so they're not going to get status and change. It's an asterisk. For the Asian subgroup, they have 21, but they don't meet the 30 threshold, so they won't get a performance category. So you can see, although they don't have a performance category, you can find how they are doing on our 5x5 grids because we provide the language from our status and change reports on the right-hand side. Their Hispanic population as well as our African American population all have greens. Again, this is graduation rate, so we're looking for students to be above a certain threshold. Nicely done. Okay, so what I wanted to show you though, and using Monrovia as an example, I appreciate it, is the click-through for the grade 11 assessments. So what you are seeing here on the status and change report is on grade 11 assessments only how the total student population did. And this was, again, an attempt at trying to get at some of the concern that we weren't showing practically anything for the college career indicator because we're still catching up on data for that. So for the total student population at Monrovia, you can see for status and for change where they land for grade 11 only. The other report I wanted to show you, and again, yes?
Is there a reason why not to put the height of the college?
Yes, because for grade 11, it's not a standalone indicator. Remember, it's combined with. I do, I know, and you know that well, but I wanted to make it for everybody else at the dais that we do not have a standalone indicator for grade 11 assessments. It's combined with our college career indicator, and so those additional metrics together, combined, will create a performance category.
And I understand that. And at the same time, I'm just given that we're not getting any weight to these indicators and we're not adding them up and stuff like that, why not give the information? I guess this is what I'm,
Why don't you disaggregate the information?
do it because I think, I mean, as a father of 2 high school students, like, I'd love to color since I'm looking at all the colors. I mean, why make it so hard for parents to just find information that is readily available?
Sure. So again, if this was a standalone indicator, I could provide that information. But because grade 11 does not exist as a standalone indicator and it's combined with other pieces, I wouldn't be able to give you a color, but I can give you disaggregated information. And so that's what the board has been asking the department to work towards. And so how that looks for this particular indicator, we're still trying to figure that out. And in fact, I'm preempting myself, but we have created a college career work group that will give us guidance on how to move along on that. And we will come back to you prior to the September board meeting, which is the time frame that the board gave us to provide them recommendations on this particular indicator. So this is really the work. This is the bulk of the work ahead of us for the next several months. So your comments are appreciated. We do have a lot of work ahead of us. It's not something that I can simply just turn on a color. It's a policy discussion that needs to take place. Yes?
In regards to what you talked about, what about the EAP stream for the 11th grade?
So EAP is,
Early admissions.
yes, it is one and the same, right? So
It's part of the CCI, right? It's part of the
this is what you're seeing. The Smarter Balance is the EAP, right? So they did combine. When we moved to Smarter Balance, what we gained from that is that all students who take the test take EAP. It's not this disaggregate. It's not this drop off because students had to opt in. They opt in when they take the test. So we're fortunate that we have more data points now as a result.
But to John's point, if I'm reading this correctly, it says for ELA, 46.7 points above level 3. What you need to know is the percentage of students who are at level 4, because that's who's college ready, and you need to know the number who are at 3, or you need to know, because those are the, whatever the terminology is for almost college ready. But this is just this is doing the point thing.
This is doing the point thing. So, keep in mind, we still have our CASP reports up. The district gets those on a regular basis as student testing starts. Students have student score reports. That is really At a student level, that is one of the most important things that the state provides. But at the state level, we do have various avenues to get this information, and I would go back to our CASP reporting site for that, because that is really more rich of information than what you're seeing on the dashboard for this particular measure, at least, or this particular data point. We have not disaggregated the data for you. We haven't gone into that. That is being done on the CASP website.
So when it says latest dashboard updates and it says grade 11 assessments used are based on performance level results, you're saying only in the indicator, but not what we're seeing here displayed.
That's correct. What we're seeing is we're being able to click through. So we talked about being able to click
See
through
the distance from level 3,
from level 3.
but maybe it would be more consistent if you actually showed percentage there, because that's going to be what's in the college indicator.
Sure, and we can definitely take that into consideration. Definitely. Okay, so the other piece that I started to touch upon briefly in the slides was how we added additional information for our English learner subgroup in the assessments for grade 3. So this is broken up in between your English language arts and your mathematics. So for English language arts, what we see for Monrovia, and this was the area that we knew that they had some work to do because they had student groups that were in red and orange, and thank you again for volunteering. I know that this is tough. It looks like it's their students with disabilities that they will need to focus on. But this is where the additional English learner data is. And so broken up for this subgroup again, or disaggregated rather, are the EL only and the reclassified students. So you can see the breakdown between those, and that was something that I know that this group felt strongly about, the board did, and we got a lot of input from advocates on this measure. So this is where you find that data. We've had additional requests along the same lines, and I know I don't want to preempt Jonathan about data reports, so he'll cover that in his presentation. But these were the main things that we've put in. I also wanted to make sure that you were aware there's a translate button, which is using Google Translate. If you have folks that want to look at other languages, we do have a short glossary, and then the resources page does have frequently asked questions here. It links to the California Department of Education's website that includes a communications toolkit. There's now a webisode, so you can hear myself and Jason Willis from Wested actually narrate a 13-minute orientation. So if you don't want to do an orientation, we've provided it for you. There is also those quick reference guides that I spoke about, all in here in the state and local indicators, our downloadable data files. I know folks have taken advantage of the fact that you can get all this raw data, this rich data, and filter through it for whatever you'd like to find out about, as well as our technical manual, which has been updated with the release. We did get some feedback on certain things that needed to be explained differently, and so that is all there. And then finally, these last couple of links are to areas where you can find additional data. So the CASP data site that we just talked about, our DataQuest web pages, which are rich of information and are different than really what the accountability system and this dashboard were meant to do. Okay, yes.
You talked earlier about, thank you for the presentation so far, really appreciate it. You talked earlier about the narrative box.
Yes.
Were you going to show?
I can show. So the one, did Monrovia, have you guys filled out the narrative box yet? I won't put you on the spot again. I told you that Woodland Joint Unified has completed it. So this is a functionality of the dashboard coordinator. Every LEA has designated at least one, if not two, coordinators that have access to the back end of this system, which is really important, not only just for the narrative summary, which is here down at the bottom. I'm going to make this a little larger.
On Woodland.
Joint Unified.
Thank you.
So they're enthusiastically reviewing the data presented. They appreciate the most multifaceted approach. Did you see I picked the one that was really positive? I'm only seeing one other one, so I won't go into that one. But this is where you would find the narrative summary. And again, this is a functionality that the dashboard coordinator has access to. And the reason I bring up the dashboard coordinator and the importance of that person is because they're the ones that have the ability to fill out the local indicators. So the functionality as far as how the local indicators get populated is the responsibility of the dashboard coordinator. And Jeff and his folks have just completed an orientation for the dashboard coordinators over the last 2 days. So they have now been oriented on how they can fill it out, and the functionality, like I said, was released yesterday. So they have a private preview of, if they've taken all the steps to lead up to being able to fill out those pieces, the functionality is available to them. Yes.
Because it's down under kind of even the just instructions about how to, the notes on how to use the page, do you think it would be more visible if it was up at the top, kind of under the, like before the row of report names? And I guess it depends on.
Of course. So I guess
how
it's,
much visibility, but.
What's the purpose, I guess, is what do you want folks to see from the beginning? And I think that's sort of what if you have a recommendation, that's sort of what you need to keep in mind is, and this at this point is only being shown on
Equity report.
on the LEA homepage.
I would just say that it might, if we do want people to see it, because it's a lot of scrolling down.
It is a lot of scrolling, yes. Tara?
Yeah, it's so helpful to get walked through this by you, so thank you.
Okay, good.
I had a couple of kind of questions. I really appreciated your comment about the translation of the 2 document guides. When I click on Google Translate and go to Spanish, the Spanish version doesn't show up there when you click down into the PDF, so that would be something to fix.
Are you talking about, I'm sorry, you're looking through the resources section, or you're
No, just
clicking
when I
on
go to the
Translate?
Translate, go to Spanish, and then you get to the guia, but you
Okay.
click on the PDF and you get the English version.
Got it. That's good to know. I know that those documents are available on the department's web pages. So if I'm on the, if you were to type in dashboard on the California Department of Education's web pages, again, this is the sister site under the communications toolkit. I know that we have put those up. So this is another way to get in, but we should make sure that the ones that are on the dashboard are available.
So that would be great.
Okay.
The other kind of just, you were asking for feedback on the equity report, the
Yes.
first thing you see. I know that when I clicked to the status and change report, my colors became much more meaningful to me. So I just wonder if those descriptor words, the very high or maintained or whatever it is, should be on that top level page.
On the
I don't know
homepage.
if other people had that.
We actually got told this week we should take them off altogether because folks found it to be, it was contrary. So we've heard it from all ends, but that.
And maybe
that's
there are
helpful too.
better descriptor words, but these descriptor words
And those
made the color much
Sure.
more meaningful.
And just, I want to make sure that folks understand that these descriptor words tie directly to those 5x5 charts that we've seen, those rainbow charts. So they mean something because you can then look at where you fall on the rainbow chart.
Well, and in thinking about, why am I red and how do I fix it?
You're right.
It helped answer those questions. And then my third question was just, is there anticipated functionality where you could see other schools in the same place or in a very different place that you want to get to?
So I think what you're asking is, are you looking for similar schools, schools that may have best practices for a particular student group that is similar in size to yours, or something along those lines? We've had, again, we've had that feedback as well from others as early as yesterday or the day before. So, one of the big things we want to make sure that we take care of during this period, this transition period to the full implementation, is our search functionality, but also the look and feel. And districts want to see their schools all listed, and we're not doing that right now. So we're not even doing some basic functionality that we really need to move towards. So, but to your point, it's well taken. How do we get there? I should mention that you can look at, I would be remiss, Jenny would not be happy with me if I didn't show you our 5x5 placement grid. So, John, if you let me use your school district again. And we'll look at, we were looking at graduation indicator, so I'm going to be consistent. And let's see. So again, this is the companion site. You can get to this site from the dashboard, but what this shows you at a glance is this chart. and where the student groups land by indicator. So it can be very powerful, and we've been told by districts and by schools that this is very powerful to see at a glance how their student groups are all doing. Reversely, you can look at the district and see how their schools all land for their all students in this chart. So for Monrovia, I could bring that up as well, but this again shows you how their students are doing. Okay. So if there's no further questions on the current dashboard, we will move on to Jeff's slides. And while Jeff is coming up here, I will get back to our slides because I moved off of them.
Quick question. So when you were saying there was a link to other additional data, for the EL indicator, is there a link both to reclassification and to students who progressed one level so that you can see the separate?
Not at this point. Not at this point, but that is something that we've been asked about to disaggregate between in the English learner progress indicator. So that is something we are considering for fall.
Because there was a place, even after Title III went away, there was a place that had the equivalent of AMAO 1 and 2 for 15-16, but it's gone now.
It's been renamed. It's been renamed. So I can talk to you after break.
Excellent, because I was looking for it and I called data question.
Yeah, it's still on there. It's just called former accountability reports. We'll catch up. All right. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff.
Thanks. Good morning. Excuse me. So the goal ultimately is for improved student outcome, right? So we have tools that we're already in place and we're developing tools in the statements of model practices. And it's to support the LEAs in their planning, to address at the local level the needs of their student population as a whole and then the unique needs of the individual student groups, excuse me, which will lead to improved student outcome. So the relationship between the LCAP and the dashboard, they're tools. The dashboard is going to provide some information and identify areas that need some attention, or identify areas that are successes. And we talk about that, and we'll see that in the plan summary is greatest successes and where the LEAs are doing well. And then also looking at the local data to, the dashboard is slice in time, and you have your local data that's ongoing and to address your needs, or your goals, your actions, and your outcomes where you are. And then the LCAP is your planning document and where you are, and using this information then to develop your LCAP, the goals, the actions and services, to reach the goal, which is the improved student outcomes. So the link then or the specific ties from the dashboard is here in the LCAP, is in the plan summary, the greatest progress. Again, this is where you tell your success. The plan summary is written last. It's first as far as accessibility to the public and the community. It'll be something that really is written last after you have developed your LCAP. You look at your annual update and the analysis, looking at, again, the dashboard is one tool, along with your other outcomes at the local level of where you're doing. And then in your goals, actions, and services, how do you identify the need? What have we looked at based on the annual update, on the dashboard, on local indicators and local data, excuse me, is to then, that's the tie between the information you have and into the LCAP. And so we'll show you where it is actually on the LCAP itself, here in the plan summary, again, written last. You'll see in the LCAP is referred to as the evaluation rubrics. That statute is the evaluation rubrics. The dashboard is the manifestation or the operational of the rubrics. You can see here then in the greatest needs, based on what you've seen in your dashboard, along with, again, at the local level, what you have there is, what are your greatest needs? Your greatest progress? Celebrate your successes. And that's what this section is for. The greatest needs, again, it says referring to the evaluation rubrics along with other information, state indicator, local performance indicators, where have you met, what are your greatest needs, looking at this data. And then the performance gaps is specifically referring to the evaluation rubrics and looking at any state indicator where performance for any student groups that are 2 or more below all student group of that color, excuse me. And again, this will be addressed as you're writing your LCAP. This will be addressed as you look at your annual update, as you look at your identified need, but then you can come back and you'll see that, and you'll come back and this is how we're addressing our needs within our student population. In the annual update, you can see here using actual and measurable data outcome, including your LCFF evaluation rubrics, and then go through your analysis, the annual update of where have you done, how well have you done within the goals, and overall describe the overall implementation of your actions and services. How well have you done it? Describe the effectiveness of the actions and services. Explain any material differences, and then any changes that you're going to make as a result of this evaluation and as a result of this analysis. And again, another tie to the dashboard in the LCAP is the identified need. It's blown up there a little bit. You can see, describe the needs, looking at qualitative and quantitative information, including the evaluation rubrics. What are your needs? What are you looking at? What do you need to do to develop your goals? And then the actions and services to meet those goals. Any questions? Pretty straightforward. Glenn said go slow. I don't think I went slow. Please.
One of the things that was interesting is that when the dashboard came up, people were really looking at those indicators. And some of the things, like I'll take, for instance, EL. So in the state priorities and what we've been measuring on our LCAP were 2 separate things. But now in the dashboard, we have one combined thing. So in terms of how the dashboard and the LCAP work together, should we be reporting outcomes on the 2 separate or together now?
So the requirements for the LCAP and the metrics within it, the dashboards are indicators, but you still have the specific metrics that you will be addressing within the LCAP, and that's what you'll put in the baseline in the new expected outcomes. You have your baseline and then where you expect to be in the 3 years. The indicators are a tool, is part of the information, but you're still going to look at the individual metrics for each of the priorities within the LCAP, and you'll respond and report out those specific metrics.
So for the SBAC, I think it just says use use a state test. So we could choose to use percent proficient or use distance from 3 in the LCAP as our metric, I assume, because the state laws, okay. And if I could just make a quick comment, and this has to do with identified need. And when we've looked at our school plans, oftentimes, and we have a column that says identified need, what we see is 40% of the students didn't score high enough on the CST in the past. That was a need. And that's not a need. That's an outcome that says that there's a need under there somewhere, without actually identifying the need. And so I just wanted to kind of clarify for this identified need, I'm hoping that we won't just see people reporting outcomes that are low and saying, see, there's a need there because the outcome's low, without maybe saying, what's the need under it.
So I can say our office reviews and approves the county office LCAPs, and I can say that there has been improvement from year 1 to now as far as writing these goals, actions, and services, and the needs. And you're right, first time out the gate, there's quite a bit of saying we're at 40%, which is not necessarily needed as an outcome. And that has that writing quality, if you will, has certainly improved, where they've taken a deeper dive in looking at it and say, this is our need, and this is where we want to get, but this is our need and what's missing and how we're going to get there.
and I didn't attend the CCE training, but I'll link this in because I read the materials, and I think I've kind of said this before, I hope we don't link too much this whole accountability and improvement to the document of the LCAP and the compliance aspect of it. And we're really, because it looked, at the presentation, it looked like there's like, here's a cycle, and this is when you're doing this part of your LCAP, and it's like, I'd rather see the focus on, this is continuous improvement cycle, and by the way, record the, whatever you discussed and came to conclusions on in your LCAP at this point. It's just the receptacle for the work that's part of that cycle, and just hoping the CCE will more flavor towards the continuous improvement cycle than here's when you do this part of the LCAP.
Right, and I think you look at the minimum, there are specific minimum requirements to meet the, requirements to an LCAP, but at the same time, as CCEE has said in other trainings is, if you write a good LCAP, if you really address the needs of your students and what's going on at the local level, just almost by default, you will have met the minimum requirements for those LCAPs. And again, there's a progression you're seeing within the LEAs of writing quality LCAPs, that it's not just filling in the bubbles, checking off the boxes, but capturing the interaction at the local level and articulating those goals and actions and services. And I think the new template will bear that out as well. I think an improvement closer to the requirements, but then it has the ability to have those conversations and capture those conversations at the local level.
Go ahead, Susan, and then Araceli.
So I'm thinking about the greatest progress, greatest needs performance gap component. And the comments that I'm going to make are, please don't take me wrong that I'm thinking about this as a compliance document at all. I'm really appreciative and having great conversations with our districts around continuous improvement, progress. I mean, really, these plans are coming to life so well for our districts. And in these boxes and in the red rectangles that you've shared with us, there is a bit of, don't forget, you need to make sure that, when there's 2 of this, and you have to make sure that you're reporting on that. So there's a bit of mustness there. And so my question is there, so let me say it this way. The dashboard provides such rich information, and looking through the dashboard, one can extract what needs to go into the greatest progress, what must be reported in greatest needs. But it's a bit of a, if this, then that, lots of going back and forth. I'm curious if there's some way to extract the information for a district so that they can be sure that they're capturing those components in those boxes, but it's not a hunt. Like, they don't have to make sure that they haven't forgotten it accidentally. And I say that because I really believe our districts want to do what's absolutely right for the plan, what they want to do to make sure that they've addressed the boxes. And I think on the county office side, when we are reviewing districts, we're looking for those. So there's just we just want to be transparent with, here's what needs to be reported on, here's what we're looking for. So I'm curious if there's going to be a way to extract it real easily so that districts and counties don't miss that.
So I believe so, as we're working with the San Joaquin County Office of Ed, as they're developing the electronic template, the e-template, which is they're also have done the dashboard. And the hope and the intent is, as it's built out, is to have the SARC and the dashboard and the LCAP to talk to each other, as it were, within that system. And so that would to draw that. I would agree with you with these prompts feel must have. Again, I would go back that the plan summary is written last. So if you have gone through the process through the LCAP, this will have been captured. And granted, there's specific, from the dashboard numbers and needs, but as you develop it, it would answer those questions. But specifically, the e-template as it's being developed, the anticipation and the hope as it's built out is to be able to draw that information from the dashboard to the LCAP.
Okay, and I would agree that as the plans are written, they're addressed, but I think it would be helpful to have something just real immediate because of the work that districts are doing. I know that individual county offices and districts are creating spreadsheets on their own to make sure that they don't miss something, but it would be great if it was just made available. So thank you for that.
And my question is more on that same page where it says performance gaps. This may have been addressed, it just be a matter of refreshing my mind. But when it says that to identify any state indicator that has 2 or more performance levels, is it just any or is it all?
It says any.
It says any, but I'm hoping it's all.
That was the intent.
It's a great, I can't answer it any more than what it says, any. And I think again, it goes to the part of this is to capture what have you done within your LCAP, right? So if you're looking at it as you identify the needs, there may be a greater need. If you have groups that
Multiple needs.
multiple groups, you still might want to hone this is a greater need. And the requirement is not to address all priorities equally. And so you would look at it, and again, it would be the ability to say, this is, given all of this, this is where we're really focusing on, because we think that we'll get the greatest leverage of our resources to take this approach. And I think that this is where you're taking is the any. Point well taken about the all.
And then the second comment I have is on the goals and the identified need. When I was going through this page, just the placement of the identified need, it was confusing to me because I got a little lost. So what I would recommend is just moving, a minor change would be moving the identified need right under the goal 1, because I think the other box is just a little check off. So when I first read it, I thought that it was identify need if you had a local goal that was different, because it seems like a subset of something. Yeah, so that's just that. Thanks.
Other questions?
Comment?
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just wanted, as following up on Member Kenny's comments, just do a shout out for the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, and just note that at this point, which is really such a major difference from the first time that we rolled out the LCAP a couple of years ago, to now with this version of the template and the dashboard, to have the services of the collaborative out there really barnstorming our state to provide technical assistance and support and get the word out. We've got a lot more work to do that, but it just really made a huge difference, and want to thank them for that. And I know that one thing that they emphasized in their workshops, and they did both a plenary workshop around the overall set of tools, but then did a number of breakouts, is really emphasizing that the dashboard is not the end of analysis. The dashboard is a starting point for analysis, and that really it becomes a tool for this continuous improvement cycle that Member Kenny was referring to. And if we the gravitational pull of the old ways of compliance and shame and blame are really strong, and it's going to take all of us, just getting into escape velocity out of that gravitational pull to make that happen. And there's not enough communication that we can muster to really put on that at this point. And to Member Salcido's comment, just want to note as an example that I saw a great example done by Superintendent Monroe of taking the data from her county and putting it together as a tool, I assume for LEAs, to look at in terms of where things spread out and what the kind of the spread and the continuum of performance was on the indicators. And lastly, just want to thank you for this rich input as we go through this. We ourselves at the state level are in a continuous improvement cycle, and this is just further evidence of it.
Just to say, and I did not intend CCEE, but I did want to say that I looked at all the materials online, and even as someone who didn't go through the breakout sessions, I saw a lot of handouts that look like really useful tools, especially in student groups, and I wrote down community engagement and increasing and improving the items for unduplicated. So I encourage everyone to go to the CCE website and look at those. All of the materials are up there for the spring workshops, and it had a nice tool for getting to underlying, and root causes and that kind of thing. So some nice tools. And they were there both as examples filled out and blank. So if people are looking for other ways to help, it's there. So yes, thumbs up. I just didn't want to get all the way over to LAX from Pasadena, so that's why I didn't go.
Okay, I think we're ready to close out this presentation by just giving you a couple of teasers. The first is the English Learner Progress Indicator Workgroup recommendations are up next, so I won't go into any further detail, but we will take those recommendations along with the CDE's recommendation on what to do with that indicator to the board in May. The board will also take up the Every Student Succeeds Act, and this afternoon you'll hear a presentation on options for the lowest 5% of Title I schools criteria from Jenny Singh. The plan will also talk about the 95% participation rate requirement, which we've actually been able to meet these last couple of years. So that's been, I don't anticipate a lot of concern over that. We do have, the board does have a July meeting, so I haven't skipped it intentionally. I just don't know quite yet what we'll have for July. But I know for September, we have a commitment to have them take action. We are finally going to be back, or for the first time, be on our annual cycle in which the board will provide direction to the department on what they want to see in the actual release of the indicator come November. So as we're running through our data simulations, giving feedback from our work groups, we have the work group for college career, and then we're also putting together an alternative schools work group to start influencing the discussion. The board will also get an update on the chronic absenteeism data since we'll have collected it for the first time. We can talk a little bit to them about the data quality that we're seeing and how that could be potentially included in the dashboard. They'll also hear a growth model update at that September meeting, and then obviously they have to approve the state plan for ESSA since the deadline is in September. Finally, just again, looking ahead, and we will be back in front of you, I know, at your next meeting, but for the actual release, again, this is anticipating it to be November-ish timeframe. The release will include the California alternate assessment results for the first time. So we did bring our dilemma about this being a different test than the Smarter Balance test to our technical design group yesterday, and we do have some work ahead of us to figure out how to put this in the dashboard. We'll also be able to report out for the first time in the dashboard on foster youth and homeless student groups, because we'll be able to, again, do the simulations using those student groups. You can see that there is a distinction between what the N size will be at the LEA level versus the school level. So that is something we'll ask the board to take action on. And then finally, we've talked a little bit about college career indicator, but this is what you'll see for the release again come fall as the class of 2016. And then the chronic absenteeism, I'm thinking we're going to have some data to put in. Again, a little hesitant on guaranteeing the quality of that data at this point since we haven't ever collected this in CalPADS. So that is the conclusion of our presentation. Yes, final questions?
So sorry, on the subgroup, because people have been asking me these questions. So in testing, to be part of a subgroup or to have a subgroup of 30 or 15, you had to have valid test scores. And so they had to be students who had been continuously enrolled.
Continuously enrolled.
But now when you're looking at suspension, you know, other indicators where I don't know if the continuously enrolled is a criteria or not.
It differs. So that is a good point. And I know that there is some, by indicator, this information is included in our technical manual. There isn't necessarily a one-stop shop to say, this is how students are counted for each of the indicators. You have to dive into it, but I can point you in that direction. But for suspension rate, it is continuously enrolled.
It is. So not all of them are continuously enrolled.
Let me take that back. I need to look.
Okay, so it might be different by indicator.
There was I need to take
Okay, because that, especially for foster youth, because of the high mobility, I think people were afraid they would never get to a subgroup, so there's never going to be any data reported.
No, there definitely will be data reported for that, but it's a good point, and it's a good point about how we communicate that out moving forward too on how we can capture those students and how we are capturing those students, because they definitely count. I just I don't want to commit to the continuous enrollment suspension rate at least.
And then, so the EDCO just talks about these sizes, and it doesn't say one's for the LEA and one's for the school level.
You're right. So the distinction is the federal requirements are that the student group size be the same across the board. So it doesn't allow us to distinguish between different student groups. It needs to be continuous. So So that is the reason that we will be taking to the board, at least at the school level, that the N size be 30 for all student groups. When it comes to foster youth and our homeless, or at least our foster youth student group, there is, I think, maybe just one school in the entire state that would meet the 15 threshold. So we actually wouldn't even be able to report out, and we wouldn't be able to see significant numbers reported out if we used that threshold at the school level.
15,
15.
which is smaller, so you would see more than if you used the 30.
You're not going to see anything, is what I'm saying. You're going to see one school in the entire state having a foster youth population that is significant if we were to use the 15.
And if you use the 30,
You're not going to see anything,
okay,
of course, but you're going to meet the federal requirement.
right. And so the federal requirement is that all groups be the same. You can't have a group that's finer, like foster and homeless. And the feds only care about the school level, which is why we're not changing our district level.
That's right. And at the district level, we know that we're going to see those population of students come out. We actually report that out on DataQuest at this time. So we have a preview of which districts have those populations. Yes.
Thank you very much for the work you're doing. I appreciate it. In our district, it's been very well received, particularly among the principals in the work that we've been doing with them, and then they're sharing it with their staffs. But because it's so visual, it helps people really get a good understanding of where they are, and that's very appreciated. Appreciated. A couple things. One, I'm very supportive of the idea of the 30 students particularly at the local level, the school site level, just because statistically that's a smaller group, and so you're not going to find significance, or you'll find things bouncing around from year to year if you've got a really small group, and so that it's a better decision just technically. Mm-hmm. The other thing I was wondering about is the part of the feedback that I have found or heard people complaining about, that it's hard for them to understand who's who in which group, in which indicator. The little different definitions for the English learners, the different definitions, as my colleague was just talking about, for some of the other indicators. And I can imagine, I understand it's in the technical manual, but most people won't dig in there. And I can imagine another button on that home screen that just says, who's in what, where, you've got the indicator and then listed next to it, kind of a side-by-side little table that says, okay, this is the indicator, who's included. This is the indicator, who's included, to help clarify that.
The universe of students that we've put in there. It's a great point.
Yeah, a little, as well as you mentioned that the feedback about the differing dates, and to the extent that information could be right on the home page or right above the particular indicator. We're doing suspension. This is the change here, or something like that, to make it very visible for folks. That would be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you for the feedback.
Any other comments from our group? Thank you both for the presentation, the follow-up, and for the group for reminding us that this is a system that is continuing to evolve, and we'll see changes, and we look forward to hearing about those. Thank you.
Great, thanks.
So why don't we open up now to public comment on this item? Any public comment?
Madam Chair, no one has signed up for public comment.
All right. Then why don't we move on to item 4, the update on the various work groups and the statements of model practice.
Morning. Can everyone hear me? Good morning. Okay, thank you. So good morning, group members, Madam Chair, and thank you. I'm glad we used the Monrovia example. My father actually, later this year, he will be celebrating his 65th high school reunion from Monrovia Arcadia Duarte High School, which I'm assuming, although I don't know how many members of that graduating class are still around, but anyways, so that was a cool kind of connection. So I'm Jonathan Eisler. I'm from the Data Visualization Reporting Office in Cindy's division, the Analysis, Measurement, Accountability Reporting Division. And I just wanted to, in advance, thank Jenny Singh, who she and her office really did the lion's share of a lot of the kind of data work and preparation that went into this work group, which is the English Learner Progress Indicator Work Group, and also Cheryl Haviland, who is in my unit, who did a bunch of the work on simulations and the data work. So I just wanted to, in advance, thank them for all their hard work. So this morning, I'm going to give a little bit of summary kind of what the work group has done over the past 6 months. And we have finished the last work group meeting. March 29th was the final meeting of that group, and it convened last year. So we're going to give kind of a discussion of what the purpose of the group was, a summary of the work, and then also towards the end, and I thank Jacqueline for, she's going to be facilitating a work activity or group activity for all of you, which we'll get into a little bit later. And that's kind of the agenda for my presentation. Just a quick summary, the work group itself that convened 4 times was composed of 13 members. It included educators, practitioners, researchers, people from the schools themselves. It was kind of a wide, diverse range of people who were involved in that work group, and we had a lot of really, really valuable and exciting discussion and conversation. So in June of last year, the state board made a recommendation to us to actually convene a work group. And the first kind of charge of that was to explore the use of the English language proficiency assessments for California, or LPAC assessment. Also look at long-term English learners, or LTELs. Look at the role of reclassified fluent English proficient or RFEP students. Look at the criteria of all of these to look at kind of a wider picture of student performance than simply just CELT results, because we know that kind of old AMAOs was essentially just looking at CELT results. Mind you, we don't have the LPAC yet, so we did use CELT results as part of the work to kind of inform what to do, because that is the assessment metric we have now. But we wanted to look at RFEP. We wanted to look at long-term ELs as a more comprehensive way of what the picture of the progress of English learners in this state looked like. So that really was kind of the charge of the group. And then that group also advised us on kind of the development of this new indicator that's being reported on the school dashboard and will be included in the accountability system. So that really is the charge of the work group. So I'm going to jump into kind of some of the recommendations of what the work group kind of consulted us about and worked with us on. So one of the kind of really important questions was what to do with long-term English learners. How can they be incorporated into this indicator? What can and can't be done with data elements that we have that could be involved there? We also wanted to look at whether or not students who have been reclassified English proficient could be or should be included in the English learner or EL student subgroup for the academic indicator. And we do want to make a note that at the January 2017 State Board meeting, a decision was made, and just to kind of recap, the EL group was defined as all current English learners plus students who have been RFEP for 4 years or less. So we're looking forward not just those who are current ELs, but those who have already been RFEP'd, but 4 years or less, to track the progress, to track their performance over time. So that was actually taken, the action was taken in the January 2017 State Board meeting. We also, as Cindy referenced earlier, we are adding more kind of nuanced and granular EL reports, both in DataQuest, which is handled by the Data Reporting Office, and also the California School Dashboard. We won't get into kind of some of the details there. I'll talk a little bit later about some of the ideas, but I think absolutely, there's some talk about what we can do about disaggregating the RFEP data from the students who have increased CELT levels. That's certainly something that we're looking into. But also another report that our colleagues in the Data Reporting Office are working on for DataQuest is to look at those students who have ever been EL, so not just current, but those who have ever been EL in any shape or form, and track them over time, looking at kind of their trajectory by a grade level. So in other words, how many in kindergarten, first all the way through 12th, how many of those students are current ELs, and then at what year are they reclassifying, at what rate, and then how long are they, and so on and so forth. So it's this kind of almost a waterfall chart where you can see kind of progress over time. And it's very instructive because it gives schools and LEAs credit for getting students, along the path towards English proficiency. So we're excited about kind of the possibilities about what that report can do as well. So that is something, again, not ready yet, but something that the department is certainly working on in DataQuest. So this is a kind of quick summary of what the State Board has done so far in reference to the LP work group. So obviously in June of 2016 is kind of the genesis for forming this group in the first place. If you look at the June memo, it includes the purpose and the charge. So I included the link here if you wanted to look back to that in item 2. And then in October, there's a memo that gives a lot more context of what is going on in terms of the formation of the group, kind of the plan for meeting, the plan for convening, the plan of action. That's included, again, as a link here. And we looked back at the last several state board meetings, and actually updates were given at pretty much all of the board meetings of September. So September, November of last year, and then January and March. So the last 4 board meetings. And of course, as Cindy referenced, at the May meeting, the group we're going to give kind of recommendations about the LP indicator at the May board meeting. So I'm going to kind of just run down a meeting by meeting summary of what we have talked about, what we have decided, and then kind of frame the conversation around when we get to the discussion, the group activity. You'll see that we're going to focus really on kind of the last recommendation that we talked through at our March meeting. So that'll become clear in just a minute here. So we had our first meeting. It was a phone meeting in October of 2016, and we've had 3 subsequent in-person meetings since then. So really a lot of the work around especially long-term English learners is definitional, as probably a lot of you know, is what exactly is the definition of a long-term English learner from a policy standpoint. But what we found, and I'll get into a little bit more detail about this, is that when we run simulations for what this population looks like and kind of how they're changing over time, it delimits the population quite a bit. So in other words, not every school, if you follow the definition in Education Code 313.1, it doesn't include as many schools as if you were to look specifically if you just looked at the number of ELs who have been ELs for 6+ years. So I'll get into a little bit more detail about that in a minute here. But we decided as a collective group that we could run simulations both following the official kind of legal Education Code definition, but also this alternative definition to see if there would be some differences. So, as I mentioned at the October meeting, we did look into the definition a little bit more detail, and that's included as slide 8. So that was our guiding logic for one half of the simulations, and as I mentioned, the other part of the simulations was to use those ELs who have been 6+ years. And again, the reason why we looked at this is because some of the group members felt we wanted to look not just at the official definition, but also actually at the years of how long they have been EL as kind of a way of defining the scope of the problem. As I mentioned, and actually there were only about 2,400 schools that fit all of the criteria that we could run the simulations based on the LTEL definition, versus about 4,600 schools that we could actually run the simulations based on the 6+ years. So we figured that widens the net of kind of the number of schools and students that would actually be included in the simulations. So as you can see here, like I said, we decided to run simulations based both on the Education Code, but also on those students who had been identified for 6+ years as EL. So the next slide shows just what the actual Education Code is. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but what's really important to note here is that it's not just those students who have been in a school for 6+ years and have still not been reclassified. It also specifically looks at those students who have not progressed for 2 or more consecutive years on the CELT. And it also includes certain grade standards. So there's certain criteria for grades 6 through 9, certain criteria for grades 10 through 12. And what's also important is that there is an element of how students perform on the CASP, and they have to meet all of these criteria. So in other words, one of the things that we've talked through quite a bit is that you can have a student who is progressing through the CELT, but is not necessarily making progress or doing quite well in the CASP ELA, and so they can remain an LTEL based on that criteria, for instance. So that and I know that right now there's talk about changing the criteria for the LTEL definition, but as it currently stands, the definition of LTEL, you have some students who are actually doing quite well on the CELT, But because of their performance on now on the CASP, the ELA portion, which is a tougher test than the previous assessment, they're not being able to be reclassified. So this is kind of the official definition based on the education code. So at our December meeting, the group really wanted to also weigh in on what would be meaningful for the definition of EL subgroup for this larger academic indicator, which is, of course, also in the dashboard. And as I mentioned earlier, I referenced the link to the January board item. The definition included those who are current ELs, but also who had been RFEP 4 years or less. And so that feedback was collected and discussed at the December meeting. And again, that informed the decision that, of course, happened in January of 2017. But then we turned our attention to how this long-term EL data could be actually used in our in the calculation for an English learner progress indicator. And we'll get into some slides pretty soon about how the definition currently was, and then when we included LTEL component, what it would look like differently. Because the board really had given a recommendation to look very, very clearly and very seriously at what, you have this indicator that so far we're looking at the number of students who are advancing in the CELT 1 or more level, and also giving credit to schools for reclassifying students. But what about these long-term ELs, right? You can be making progress on those two fronts, but you still have a really high proportion of long-term ELs. What are you doing about that population specifically? So the group really was thinking long and hard about how to incorporate LTELs into that calculation. So that conversation occurred in December. In January, by the January meeting, we had again talking a little bit about how the information can be reported on DataQuest that further disaggregates the LTEL population. So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, we're still kind of exploring what we can do in terms of further disaggregations for reporting information. So there was some feedback generated on that. We also had some discussion around how the information could be presented on the dashboard, which I know Cindy went into a little bit of a show and tell a little bit earlier about that. So we gathered quite a bit of feedback on that. But the bulk of the work at that January meeting went into running these simulations, which I'm going to get into the findings in just a little bit here. And what we found two things, which we were hopeful that we would find something that would be very crystal clear and show us the pathway forward. And what happens sometimes when you run data simulations is the exact opposite occurs, or something, or shades of gray. And there were two really things that stood out very quickly. One is that interpreting the results was extremely complicated, because when you're giving positive credit for the number of students who are increasing at least one level on CELT and reclassifying students, but then you're effectively kind of retracting or taking away credit for maintaining a large number of LTELs, that had kind of a masking effect. It actually kind of canceled out progress. So in other words, we had this kind of overall picture of almost neutral, even though in reality, the first parts of the work of RFEPing and of getting students to improve progress on the CELT might be very, very positive. So that was a problem, because the way that we looked at it, it really masked progress. And in some cases, so to give you a for instance, we ran the simulations looking also at where they would fall on the color scheme. And in many cases, if you looked at it without the LTEL criteria, a school might be in the blue, and then you add the LTEL criteria, it would now go into the orange or even the red in about 40% of the cases. And then the opposite happened too, which was just kind of baffling to us, which was that you essentially, in some cases, a school that might have been in the orange or red now all of a sudden was in the green. And we kind of realized very quickly that it was really a proxy for you just have a bunch of long-term EL students, and it could be just because of the demographics of the location. It could be a bunch of things that are not really related at all to actually helping your students reclass and helping your students improve on the CELT. So it was crystal clear that it was problematic. The other reason, and it just kind of made sense once we step back a little bit, is that this unfairly penalizes middle and high schools, because you have elementary schools, only sixth graders really could fit the definition. So I'll jump in a couple slides here, you'll see what that means. So if you look at, if we base it on remember, we did two definitions, the education code definition and the 6 years plus definition. If you look at the school summary, 1% of elementary schools were in the red or orange on this indicator with the LTELs, but 86% of the middle schools would fall in red or orange, and 93% of the high schools. So what that says is that basically there's just a lot of long-term ELs in middle schools and high schools and not in elementary schools. It doesn't say anything about how they're doing in terms of performance and in terms of reclassification. It really doesn't say anything about that. And if you take it to the district level, the high school districts, about 79% were in the orange, and then you had 0.6% of unified and 0.6% of elementary. So not really a meaningful differentiation between, if you cut it by the grade spans, it wasn't really a meaningful and instructive exercise. And if you look at based on the other definition, which was the 6+ years of EL, you find almost identical patterns. We actually found almost very similar patterns, right? So only 1% of elementary schools fell into the red or orange, almost 100%, 97% of middle and 95% of high schools fell into the red or orange. And again, pretty similar results as the official ed code definition for the district summaries, 95% for high, unified and elementary. So we knew that it would, again, the bottom line here is that it really unfairly penalizes the middle schools and high schools for essentially inheriting students that have just been EL for a certain number of years. You're basically just defining a population. You're not saying anything about their performance. So the good news is that we had a lot of very creative thinkers in the work group and in the department, and we kind of brainstormed what does that mean at our January meeting. And fortunately, we have a lot of really great data people in our group. And so they kind of made a recommendation, that we did have available data that we could work with that would actually give extra credit for if you have a school or district that for long-term ELs who advanced at least one level in the CELT, could we somehow give them extra credit? So even though every student who increases at least one level in the CELT would be getting credit towards this ELPI, this ELP indicator, could we somehow give extra credit for those LTELs? So somehow give them double credit. And so that was kind of the proposal we looked at. And we looked at two different proposals. We ran two sets of simulations. We ran one set of simulations that gave half a credit. So in other words, you get kind of a half bonus point per long-term EL that increased 1+ level. And then we looked at one that's just getting a full credit. So essentially doubly counting them in the numerator of the equation. And we'll show you the results in just a minute here, but the group had a consensus that the full credit makes more sense than the half credit. The half credit really didn't impact a very significant number of schools and districts versus they felt that giving full credit to that student gives a stronger message and maybe it acts more of as an incentive within accountability. And just one final thing in terms of the March meeting, we again had additional conversations about more EL and LTEL reports in DataQuest and the school dashboard, which we're of course working on. So become really familiar with this next slide because this is what you're going to be kind of referencing with our group activity coming up here in a few minutes. And this is kind of if you look at everything but the green, that is the kind of current formula that we had created for the English learner progress indicator. So it's it's all of the annual CELT takers who increased at least one CELT level, plus those who were already in the early advanced or advanced English proficient. Because remember, just because you're at the advanced or early advanced or advanced, that doesn't mean that you're reclassified yet. Because again, if you don't score very well on the CASP ELA, you're still going to be considered EL or won't be reclassified. And then we gave credit to those who were reclassified in the prior year. So again, those are the two positives that we're kind of giving credit for. And if you ignore the green line for now, the original kind of equation was to then divide that by the total number of annual CELT takers in the current year plus those who were reclassified in the prior year. So obviously the possible total that you could get would be 100% or 1.0. That's not going to happen very often because we know that it's actually very difficult to increase a level plus in the CELT. We know that. But in theory, you could be up to 100% on this formula. And then if you look at the green line, what was added essentially was this is where you're giving the extra credit for that subgroup of CELT takers that were long-term ELs. So you essentially get extra credit for them. That green line represents the proposal from the work group that you get extra credit. So this is essentially the proposal that's on the table that we're going to discuss. Okay, I know there's a lot of math. So if you look at so we ran the numbers, and as I mentioned, we found there are about 6,400 schools that were assigned an LP color, and 4,900 had long-term ELs. And again, a lot of schools that don't have students that have 6+ years wouldn't have long-term ELs. So remember, you have to meet the criteria of having students who are at least 6 years worth of English learner. And then we looked at the schools that had at least one LTEL student that increased performance level. So the number drops precipitously there. Only 853 schools met that criteria. So then we applied this extra weight for these students, and we found that only 89 schools improved status. And actually, of that subtotal, 63 schools would actually change weight. So what we realized is that's actually about 1%. So about 1% of the schools that have an LP color, about 1% of them would get a color bump, basically, from this extra credit indicator. And again, we made a note here, a caveat, that this is just a simulation. This isn't in the spring dashboard, but obviously when we have the fall release, it's something that we're going to be considering in terms of including. So before we get into the group activity, and I know I'm going to hand it over to Jacqueline in a minute here, any questions about either the work that the group has done over the past 6 months, or about what the kind of recommendation is? Yeah.
Did the group consider, and if they did and then didn't want to do it, why giving the extra for any LTELs who were reclassified? So you get points for reclassifying an LTEL. I mean, you get points for everyone who reclassifies, and an extra point for LTELs who reclassify.
So at the very end of our March meeting, which was our last meeting, we actually got that very request. Not to get into too many details, we couldn't do it right off the spot because the LTEL data are only available for 15-16, and so we would actually need the 16-17 school year to end to go backwards to look at that. So, but we are actually looking at a proxy. So our office is actually looking at kind of a proxy measure of a 6+ years right now. So we are looking at that, and that was something that was raised, but it wasn't a recommendation of the work group, but they asked us to run some simulations on that.
All right, because I would propose that instead, not in addition, just to make clear, rather than give the extra point for moving a CELT level.
Well, we're looking at if it's even feasible right now. Thank you. So you read the mind of at least a couple of the members of the group, yes. Other questions or comments?
Did the work group see this particular slide that shows the results, basically the 1% change in the color bump? What was their feedback about that?
So I think they certainly understood that it wasn't something that would be monumental, but rather aspirational. I mean, I think they really saw it as something that could incentivize kind of movement on it. So it wasn't, again, I think in some ways they actually appreciated the fact that it wasn't a huge game changer, but rather acted as kind of as an incentive. That was pretty much the feedback, yeah.
Okay, thank you. And I also see it as an incentive type of thing that as we continue along the line of the accountability system, schools would pay attention to and maybe could use to help motivate students and schools to move in that direction. I wonder, did other people also bring up the same idea for the reclassification, an incentive for reclassification?
Yeah, and I think, and again, like as I mentioned, it was literally brought up in like the last 15 minutes of the last, so we didn't have a discussion around it. I think the plan is to kind of look into what the data show and to see what kind of impact, and then
I guess that's what she was asking. The reason I'm asking this is because by definition, LTEL students are students who are stuck. They are students who are staying pretty much at a level. They're not advancing. Of course, they're not getting reclassified. And it's a difficult group of people sometimes to help support, or we as schools districts haven't done enough to support these students. And it makes me think of all the things that we can possibly, kind of all the tools we can put in our toolbox to help all of us focus on that group in particular.
I will say that I think one of the concerns with adding this is that schools may be incentivized to prematurely reclassify students, even if they are LTILs.
And I think there's a challenge for us right now in this coming 2 years, when we have this little window of not a statewide definition for reclassification. But once we move to the LPAC and once we have a statewide definition, I don't think there is going to be any really opportunity for misuse.
Other comments, questions? I just wanted to reinforce the fact that I think this proposal really supports this idea of being able to identify more specifically the areas for continuous improvement. And I see that as the strength of it, so.
So I'm going to hand it over to Jacqueline, who's going to give kind of instructions for next steps, and I'll be playing a role too, but I'm going to hand it over to Jacqueline.
Thank you, Jonathan. So at this point, we're going to transition down to these two tables right here. And I'm just going to ask if half of you will sit on this side and the other half on the other side. And we're going to basically discuss these topics here, pros and cons of providing the extra weight, and then positive and negative consequences of this particular proposal. So if you'll join me down here, we'll have Ronnie Jones and Melanie Sheppy supporting this side, and myself and Kimberly Bourne over here. So thank you. Yes. We'll have materials for you at the table. But I do recommend bringing the PowerPoint with you.
And CPAG members, just since we're a little behind, I'll just ask you to self-break as you need to, okay? Okay, we all back?
No? Oh, here we go. All right. I think people are still making their way back. Okay. So I know you all need to get to the next discussion. So Jacqueline did ask me really quickly to talk through what the work group's thoughts were about this proposal. And I will say, like I said, there was a consensus. It was a unanimous consensus that they agreed. Again, we had two options, right? We had the half weighting and the full weighting. And the consensus was reached. If we're going to do this, let's definitely do the full weighting. And it was a consensus. It was unanimous. There was no dissent at the March meeting on that topic. So that definitely was a consensus. So I think that was one of the questions that was had. And again, I know I talked to both groups about the impact of the special education population of the subgroup within long-term EL. So I'm glad I had an opportunity to talk to both tables about that, because it is a sizable proportion of long-term ELs. About a third of LTELs are students of some sort of disability. So that's another thing I wanted to mention. So I'm going to turn it over to, I think each table had a spokesperson, right? If you want to summarize the pros and cons and unintended consequences. So maybe we'll start over on this side. I don't know who was the spokesperson on my left. Who did you voluntold? I don't remember. Was it you, Linda? Yeah. Okay, go for it. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to get you guys. I'm going to get you. I thought the comments of our group were really good. We actually mainly focused on the pros, both of the scheme of providing extra weight, as well as thinking about the unintended consequences. And probably like most of us, we really saw this as an incentive to focus on these students, an incentive for both the adults in the schools as well as the individual students to think about what could be gained by working really hard to move up an extra level, that you get double points in a sense. Mm-hmm. We also had a member who made a comment about what does this plan, what's the message from the state if we put this plan in place? And one is it shows districts and schools that the state is very serious about the performance of long-term English learners, that they care about this group, and they recognize that this is a group that is a challenge for a lot of us to continue to move forward. And so by providing that extra incentive, it is the state saying, you know, we know you're working hard. You've got a hard job and you've done it. Congratulations. Then the other message that the state, I think, really sends, we talk about continuous improvement and we look at our whole accountability system between status and change. But in this case, we're actually really emphasizing the change and the continuous growth and giving extra weight to that. Really speaks highly about what the state's value is for continuous improvement. We talked about a concern just towards the end of our conversation that needs to be researched. And that is right now in the reporting out, one of the questions was, what happens, or how often do people move? We saw in the data, a very small percentage of school districts or schools actually moved up a color category. It was very, very small. I think it was, what, 1%. And we recognize that that's very low right now. It might change as we move forward. But the other question is, that needs to be researched is, what is that percentage in large urban school districts, small rural districts, small high schools, large high schools, et cetera? Because one of the things that I've been getting a lot of feedback on already is that if your sample size is really small, if your group is small, a difference of 1 or 2 kids can move you up or down a color category. And that's probably not what the state intended to have happen, but that could also play out with the work with the English learners too. And so we want to be cautious about that. And that may be a larger question that impacts a lot of different groups, but it's something that the state should look at. And then a final comment that if it's true that, you know, as the data is showing us that there's not a lot of difference in terms of the impact of this if you use the state ed code definition of LTELs versus a simpler definition, which is just the kids who have been in these English learner programs 6 or more years. It's easier on schools to use a simpler definition because they can run data, they can run reports very much more easily if they only have to pull out kind of one variable to identify the group rather than it's, you know, A and B and C and D. It makes it harder for them to actually pull that data. Anything else from the group that you want to add?
That's really helpful feedback. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then what about table, I don't know who was 1 and 2, so how about the other table's spokesperson? Not all at once.
I think that we pretty much mirrored what your table discussed, but one thing that we did discuss as well was that this is kind of opening up a can of worms, per se, that brings the topic of how are we presenting the information to the students to move them. So as educators, what are we doing for the students to provide their support? It seems like we're not doing enough, obviously, if we have this many students that are staying where they're staying, and what can we do to continue to support them? We also talked about if we move students before they're ready, how does that impact the students in the future? And another large part of our discussion was that we looked at and we discussed a lot about how it's a social and cultural thing towards the end of their school years, maybe middle school and high school, that some of the students may not want to move for specific reasons. Maybe they're stuck with their friends and they want to be with their friends, their peers, where in an elementary school, the kids just want to continue to improve because they want to do better and they don't really have that challenge yet. So looking at different age levels and different grades and even cultures and backgrounds might make a big impact on that. Thank you, Tara.
Well, I appreciate the feedback, and again, I appreciate your time and your questions. And I know that, oh yes, go ahead.
Did you mention ever ELs?
Only in the reporting.
So somewhere earlier in the last 2 weeks, I was in DataQuest and saw a bunch of LTEL reports, and I just was looking for them now, and they're gone.
So so there shouldn't be anything that's gone. So
Oh, maybe I'm looking in the wrong place this time.
yeah, no, so the reports that we have up, we've had up for a little while. What I mentioned earlier is something that's in development right now, so
There was an Ever EL report that I saw earlier in the week on data
I'll
quest.
have to double back, but
Okay.
yeah. Oh, you, okay, well, Cindy has, so again, you're going to connect with Cindy on a lot of things, it sounds like.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan. So, members of the advisory group, there's a couple other items that are on this part of the agenda that are referenced in a memo that you have around an update on the school conditions and climate work group, the ad hoc family engagement work group, and the development of statements of model practices. I am just going to very briefly overview those items before we get into our next item on the Every Student Succeeds Act plan. So on the school conditions and climate work group, that group has been put together to advise the superintendent and eventually the state board on the development of additional approaches to priority 6, school climate, and also as it relates to other priorities that relate to that, because a lot of things do touch on school climate. The School Conditions and Climate Group presented to the State Board at its March meeting and had a really good set of interactions with the State Board, and also met earlier this week and is really moving quickly on the development of a recommendations framework. So I anticipate that we may be able to come to you at your June meeting with a full report on a recommendations framework from the School Conditions and Climate Work Group. Additionally, the superintendent is convening an ad hoc family engagement work group to provide recommendations and support to the department around the whole area of family engagement, both as part of priority 3, parental involvement, but just in terms of the work that we need to be doing as a state to further develop our capacity around family engagement. That work group will be meeting on April 25th, I believe. Our very own RSLE, Simeon, is going to be part of that, so thank you, RSLE, for joining us. You're doing duty all around the state, I know, in a variety of different ways, so we appreciate you giving your time for that as well, and we're looking forward to that group coming together in a robust set of this kind of input around how we should better move forward in that area. And then last but not least, at your last meeting, we had a really rich set of discussions around the statements of model practice. Those statements have gone through another iteration and are being presented out to stakeholders tomorrow in a session at the Sacramento County Office of Education. So we're moving forward with those, looking forward to being able to bring those back for further review. And Kim, I'm happy to report that per your suggestion, there's a statement for each of the 10 priorities, 1 through 8 for K-12 LEAs, 9 and 10 for county offices. But then we added an additional 2 that we felt were of kind of overarching importance for the statements, one being continuous improvement. How do we think about and approach this idea that we call continuous improvement, and the other being stakeholder engagement, which is also kind of a thread that runs through the LCAP development, implementation, and evaluation process. So those will also be coming back to you as an advisory group at a later date.
Questions? Kim?
I know people who used to be on the CDE's FAN, the Family Area Network. Is this ad hoc group a little open-ended, or if people are interested, or is it kind of a defined group already?
It is a defined group right now. We sent out a set of invitations to a pretty wide and diverse group of stakeholders, and they're going to come together on the 25th and look at kind of some planning work, how they're going to operate as a group, and so we'll be able to talk more about how folks will be able to additionally interact with the group going forward. But right now, there is a set of stakeholders that has been invited by the superintendent.
And back when the FAN was meeting at the statewide level, we never quite got to the point of regionalizing and having ways for people to be involved at their region that would then bubble up to the state. So maybe that can come up.
It could be in our future, but first things first.
Other questions, comments? All right, why don't we go to public comment on item 4?
Yes, Madam Chair, we have one speaker, Liz Guillen.
Good morning. I'm Liz Guillen with Public Advocates. Because of the change in the items, I have some public comment that I'm going to share specifically for Marta Zaragoza Diaz from Californians Together and the California Association for Bilingual Education. She wanted me to convey that they are good with the proposal on slide 14. They have two questions about the English learner issue. Are English learners double counted in the formula? And they wanted to also understand, is it the annual LTEL CELT takers who increased at level 1?
So the first question, can I answer that real quick? Sorry. So for the calculation on that slide, it is it's only the long-term ELs that are double counted, and then and so it's not just level 1. It's just who've increased 1 level or more.
The comment that I wish to make on behalf of public advocates was just to appreciate the fact that there are work groups, and we assume that the membership, or we hope that the membership is broad and representative. It would be helpful to know who are in the ad hoc work groups, consistent with the question from one of your members. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
One more speaker, Terry Burns.
Terry Burns, California School Boards Association. We would just like you to carefully consider the use of the CELT. If we're moving away from the CELT, it doesn't make a lot of sense to us to spend a lot of time and energy trying to shove the CELT into this bigger system, only to pull it back out very soon. So we'd like you to carefully consider that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a quick comment. Really appreciate the comments of public advocates, and just to clarify that the members of the English Learner Work Group and the School Conditions and Climate Work Group are posted on the website and have been part of the different memos that have gone forward. And right now for the Ad Hoc Parent Engagement Work Group, the invitations are out. So once we get a sense of who has responded positively, we'll be able to report that back as well.
All right, I think we are ready to move on to item 3, and we will build a lunch break into the activities around item 3. So welcome, Barbara.
I'll give me a minute. I'll find the presentation. All right, I think we're ready to go. Good morning, CPAG members. I'm Barbara Murchison, ESSA State Lead here at the Department of Education, and very pleased to be back here with you again to talk about all the goings-on with ESSA. Today, we're actually going to spend quite a bit of time not looking at the state plan, which I think will be a nice break for all of us. But instead, we're going to be looking at a brand new tool. We want to get your feedback on the LCAP addendum, which is a tool that we're going to talk to you a little bit more about later. But I just didn't want to throw you off course with the title of this PowerPoint and the first few slides. We thought it would be interesting and worthwhile to give us all an update on where we stand with ESSA state plan development, where we're headed with ESSA state plan development, but knowing that the bulk of our time together today will be looking at this new tool and getting your feedback on that. So, some things have happened even since February. I wanted to make sure we were all apprised of happenings with ESSA state plan development and things that are happening back in Washington, D.C. Just our update on where we stand with regulations. I think the last time I saw you, I conveyed to you that regulations had been put on pause so that folks had a chance to take a look and see whether or not we would continue with those regulations. So the last time I saw you, the assessment regulations had been finalized and were in effect. Those were not on pause, those remain in effect. The Title I supplement not supplant regulations, I believe I told you, never were finalized. So we never really saw those in their final form. And that big set of regs, the accountability, data reporting, and submission of state plan set of regs, were finalized, but were paused, but now they are officially rescinded. We no longer have, through the Congressional Review Act, which is an option Congress has, to pull back any regulations that have not been in effect for 60 legislative days. They have been officially rescinded. President Trump signed off on that pulling back of those accountability, data reporting, and submission of state plans regs. So we are now living in a land without those regs. As you know, template 2.0, we're on our third template. I now just call them 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0. Template 2.0 and template 1.0 was based upon all of that regulatory language. The first template was based on the proposed regulatory language. The template we got at the end of November included a lot around the finalized regulatory language. And then just last month, March 13th, we got our new slimmed down template 3.0, which had pulled out all of the regulatory requirements. So we do have an ESSA state plan template. It is considerably thinner, and it is designed to meet statutory requirements of the ESSA. All right, so I just wanted to make sure we all had that grounding. Our plan submission dates remain the same. One date was April 3rd. A number of states did submit their state plans on that first deadline. California plans to submit its state plan in September of 2017. The other variable that still is up in the air yet to be resolved is the federal budget. We are now operating under a continuing resolution for the 16-17 budget. That goes till April 28th. We're optimistic that we will have a budget after that time, but there's some concern about whether or not Congress can actually do that or whether we'll move into another continuing resolution, which will just keep funding levels as projected. So I've talked to you a little bit about the state plan template. The link to it is on our ESSA webpage if you want to take a closer look at it, and there's a link in this PowerPoint. I should note that this PowerPoint has not yet posted on the CPAG agenda page, but we will get that up there to you as soon as possible. Templates are revised to address only the statutory requirements. The other thing that's different about this template, we've talked a lot about building a coherent system, and those previous templates were organized around theme, right? So there was the tell us about your standards and assessments, tell us what you're doing to support schools, tell us what you're doing to support educators, tell us what you're doing to support students. It was organized kind of thematically, and states, I think, were encouraged to work across programs to build kind of a coherent plan. The new thinner template, 3.0, is now organized by program. So it's tell us what you're doing with Title 1A, tell us what you're doing with Title 1C, tell us what you're doing with Title 2A. So you will see a plan that does look a little bit different, but you know, most of the requirements have been maintained. One big missing piece is the consultation section, which used to be kind of at the outset of the plan. Tell us how you're consulting with all of these required groups. That is no longer going to be in our state plan, although we all know that there's been a lot of consultation going on. You all play a very important role in our consultation activity. It just won't be in the plan. A lot of the elements around supporting educators have also been pulled out of the plan. There used to be, in previous templates, there was a lot of attention to specifically how states were to address issues of educator equity, and those are no longer really featured in this new template. So I'm just giving you kind of an orientation about how what you see in the state plan draft might look a little different than some of the things we have shared with you previously. And again, we are going to submit our plan on September 18th, 2017. That has not changed. So I want to talk a little bit about what's coming up and how CPAG is going to play an important piece in that work. We anticipate that we will be bringing the draft state plan to the state board at its May meeting. So May 10th or 11th, we will be talking with the state board about that first draft of the ESSA state plan. I want to be really clear because I think there's been some misconception. That is not like the final plan, right? We still have plenty of time to work on it, refine it, and take into account public comment and other consultation work. You can see right here in this next cell, in June, we will be bringing you, so enjoy your break from the state plan today. In June, we'll be bringing you the entire draft and asking for your feedback on the draft. In July, we'll be bringing your feedback to the board. And then in August, we'll have finished our 30-day public comment period, and we'll be asking you to provide recommendations around the public comment. Are there pieces in there that you would suggest that the board address, or maybe these aren't quite as important to consider at this time? And then you can see in September, we're going to share the public comment and the feedback from you all on the public comment with the board. We anticipate that by then we will have enough discussion to be able to approve that plan and then submit it to the U.S. Department of Education on the 18th of September. So that is your plan update. Today I want to talk just a little bit about what we're going to cover today. Again, I apologize for the relatively late posting of the materials, but while you were talking about work groups, we ran around and we gave you a packet of materials, because today we're going to ask for your feedback on some new tools, how we are going to meet the local planning requirements in ESSA in a way that supplements the local planning requirements in the California way, right? So our big goal here is to align those systems. We know if Nancy Brownell were here, she would do the whole thing. I'm not going to do it. But our big goal is to align those systems so that our local state work is supplemented by our federal work. Our planning processes are an integrated process. We don't have folks doing an LCAP over here and an LEA plan over here. We really want to bring those two things together. So we're going to talk about where we are in aligning those processes and aligning those tools. We're going to talk a little bit about how this addendum was developed. And then we're going to share, the prototypes with you and ask for your feedback. Most of our time together today will be down on the floor working in groups of 4 or 5. I do anticipate that we will be able to give you a non-working lunch, a duty-free lunch. I don't know how long it'll be. But I do, I think we should be able to eke out 20 or 30 minutes in there for you to actually eat lunch without writing at the same time. You can see in front of you, you have a handout which has a series of questions also in the CPAG memo. For those of you who don't have all of these papers, they are part of the memo for item 3, the attachments in front of you as well. But before I invite my colleague Joy Kessel up to lead us through these documents, and I should say Joy has done quite a lot of heavy lifting around getting us to this point, so much appreciation for her, and she's clearly the best person to share with you what we're looking at. I want us to take a moment and look out into the future. I won't put a step count on it, but many, many steps ahead. We kind of have a vision, a dream of all of this, the e-template and the dashboards and the LCAP addendum and all of these pieces that are key to informing our accountability and continuous improvement system, all being electronic, right? And all being linked together and kind of talking to one another. Right? So that is the goal, right? And you all know that that could take a little bit of time. We're at a place now where we've, and Joy will talk more about how we got here, where we've got a nice paper version, right? Or we think it's a nice paper version. We want your help in making it an even nicer paper version. And then we're going to pilot the paper version, right? To make sure it actually works in paper. And our goal is to get it to be an electronic version so that folks can use it next year electronically. And our goal after that is to have the electronic version of the LCAP addendum so beautifully dovetailed with the LCAP that it won't seem like two different things, right? So I want you to bear in mind that that's kind of where we're headed, and take some deep breaths and be patient with us, because I think even we who have been working with this with a variety of folks from LEAs are like, okay, but do we need this if it's going to be electronic? You know, like we get kind of a little circular around what's going to be electronic, what's going to be print. Today, we're on step number maybe 3 or 4 of a multi-step journey to getting to that beautiful electronic integrated system. Just keep in mind, this is an important step, but there are more steps to come as you're providing feedback. And the other piece, we are very interested and hope that the conversation today yields many questions as well, because I think, you know, how to do this right, we should be asking a lot of questions, and we know you're a great group for raising some of these tougher questions for us to grapple with. Also really interested in some solutions to those questions and ideas and suggestions. But bear with us if we don't have answers to all of those questions, because again, we're in the early phases of this and excited to hear what you think. So without further ado, I will invite my colleague Joy Kessel up to the podium.
Thank you, Barb. Happy to be with you today, CPAG members, Chair Iskin, Co-Chair Manansala, Chief Deputy Price. So today we are, as Barb opened up for us, we are looking at the local planning requirements in the Every Student Succeeds Act. And under ESSA, there are 5 programs that include local planning application requirements. Title I, Part A, basic programs. Title I, Part D, neglected, delinquent or at-risk youth. Title II, Part A, supporting effective instruction. Title III, Part A, language instruction for English learners and immigrant students. And Title IV, Part A, student enrichment and support grants. And these requirements, so under NCLB, local planning requirements were, of course, addressed through the local educational agency plan. And those plans were submitted to the CDE. Under ESSA, those plans would still need to be submitted to the CDE for approval. But with LCFF, Education Code 52064B requires that any of the LCAP templates need to allow for LEAs to meet federal requirements, and Ed Code now lists NCLB, but of course that'll change to ESSA. And you know that those LCAPs, the LEA LCAPs, are submitted to county offices. And so what we needed to do was find a mechanism, right, to allow LEAs to meet the ESSA local planning requirements, but in the context of LCAP development. And so we embarked on this process with the help of the California Comprehensive Center. We brought together a group of staff from districts and county offices who are tasked with either developing the LCAP at their sites or reviewing LCAPs. And what we did with this group, what they were able to help us with, is to match state priorities under LCFF with ESSA local planning requirements. And what we found is that a high-quality LCAP would already address some of these local planning requirements, right? And so what they also discussed, what this group also suggested, was that LEAs should be able to refer to their LCAPs in order to address local planning requirements in ESSA, so that they are not having to develop 2 different narratives that basically describe the same services and actions. And so from these conversations, the staff here, our office and with the help of other CDU staff, developed the LCAP addendum prototype, which is attachment 1. And so I just wanted to take you through this document. So it is, as Barb mentioned, this is a model version, document version for the LCAP addendum. Just as ESSA funds are going to supplement state resources, we would like this LCAP addendum to be a supplement piece to the LCAP. It includes all of the ESSA local planning provisions, including the citations, so the authority for collecting that information. And then we also included you'll see a column there entitled Alignment with State Priority Alignment. And we included this information so that we could help LEAs look at their LCAP and their activities to address state priorities and show where they align with ESSA local planning provisions. And so this information may already be addressed in their LCAP, or it could also provide useful information if they're looking for ways to use SF funds to supplement their activities to address state priorities. Also in that document, you'll see on page 2, the last row includes the 3 options that we are providing LEAs to address the ESSA planning provision. The first option is that they can refer to their LCAP, a section in their LCAP where that provision may already be addressed, with the option to supplement the information in their LCAP with any further details or narrative that helps them fully meet the ESSA provision. The second option allows for the LEA to refer to another document besides the LCAP where they may have already addressed this provision, with, again, an option to provide supplemental information to fully meet the ESSA provision. The third option the LEA could do to meet the provision is to address the provision within the LCAP addendum without referring to other documents. They could look at the provision and develop a narrative that meets that provision. And so I just want to point out a few things in the document. All right, and so attachment 1, it starts with some basic instructions. We wanted to keep the language very lean, not too much text, just the very stripped down basic information. And you'll see the options to select the programs that the LEA is applying for. And then you see the table with all of the ESSA provisions. We've included the ESSA citation. You'll see the state priority alignment column, all of the options to address the provision, and then in this column here, how those options are followed up with spaces to provide information about where this item is addressed in an LCAP or another document, or if they're going to be providing all of that information within the LCAP addendum. And so as Barb mentioned, your feedback today will help us to refine a document that will be piloted by LEAs to help us get closer to that goal of integrating all of these pieces.
Yes, we are to be looking only at the prototype right now. There's another, it's just this one.
You're just looking at attachment 1 right now, and I can go ahead and tell you what the difference is between these attachments. So attachment 1, we're looking at the prototype. And so the difference between the prototype and attachment 2, the prototype includes all of the features, all of the provisions that would need to be included in the LCAP addendum. Attachment 2 is just a sample of the formatting we're looking at for this document. So it doesn't include all the provisions. Really, the second activity that I will take you through is to look at that formatting and to provide us feedback on those pieces. So trying to see if my slides are up.
Excuse me, can I ask another question?
Yes.
I was just thinking about our LCAP really over the years and looking at this, and I haven't had the responsibility of coming up with the LEA plan per se, so I don't know the answer to this. But to the extent that I was just looking, for example, at the very first one, developing a well-rounded program of instruction, which is clearly in the LCAP, that requirement. And in our district, it meant that we looked at some data. We realized that special ed students, in particular at the middle school, didn't have access to electives, so we're using part of our LCAP to expand electives for our students. That research is not specifically stated in the LCAP. What's stated in the LCAP is that we are funding additional courses for these students. So the question I have is it going to be sufficient that it's identified there, or do we have to explain here in the narrative why we chose to offer these extra electives, how we came about the data? We'll get the data in the LCAP in terms of the percentage of kids who now have access to electives, but it's not clear to me if how I have worded it in the LCAP will be sufficient to meet the needs of this plan. from the state's point of view?
Right, so it's going to be different for each provision, right? And we don't want to set a standard length for responses. We just want to ensure that you're fully meeting the requirement of the SSA. And so that first provision that describes your basic program, you would want to, I think you would want to provide that background information, but I think what helps us now in this process that we're looking at is that is a question that's going to come up. What is the level of detail that we're going to need to provide in this response? And so I think that will help out. That will we'll be working on that in some type of guidance document with the release of this, because I don't. Yeah. Do you when you describe how the local industry will monitor? You said the first provision is your example,
Right.
So. And that's why we want to provide an extra space. So even if you refer to a place in your LCAP where this provision has been addressed by your LCAP, you could still supplement that information within the addendum to fully meet the SSA requirement.
And I actually appreciate that you'll be coming out with some more information, because thinking about it, being protective of the staff in the district, we want to be responsive, but I don't also want them to have to write a thesis about it.
Right, exactly. And we don't want to read thesis.
You don't want to read it. There
Yeah, we don't want to,
Thank you.
Right, exactly. So let me also provide a little bit more background on the context for this addendum. So the timing. So as Barb mentioned, we are looking to pilot a document version of the LCAP addendum this fall with volunteer LEAs. And this isn't for the addendum to be submitted to the CDE. What we're really hoping for in this pilot is to get feedback from LEAs, COEs about the usability of the addendum. And this feedback from the pilot will be used to create that online version of the addendum that we hope to be connected to all of these other pieces that we're working on as part of the new accountability system. What you may notice in this document is there isn't a space for expenditures, right? And so the required expenditure information for ESSA programs, that is going to be collected through the CARS, so the Consolidated Application and Reporting System. It won't be reported within this addendum. And so now that you have seen the attachment and you know where we are in the context of developing the LCAP addendum, I'm just going to explain the small group activity that we would like to take you through. We're going to have you get some time to review the LCAP addendum on your own. And then we're going to have you break into smaller groups on the floor. And we'd like to hear from you. What are the features of the prototype that you like? What features do you have questions about? And we'd also like to hear from you any thoughts that you have about what else might be needed in order to integrate the LCAP addendum with the LCAP development process. And let's see, so lunch. Working lunch, not working lunch?
Not working lunch, because we said we'd give him at least 3 minutes for lunch, right? Why don't we stop and have lunch until 12:15?
All right, you've heard her. So we are going to break, and we will let you eat lunch. No working lunch. 12:15. And we'll bring you back to, when you come back, go ahead and sit on the dais. We're going to give you some time to look at the document on your own. We'll count off to break you into groups. So we'll break for lunch back at 12:15 at your seats here. Thank you. All right, folks, so it is now 12:15, our promised time to start up again. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here just to keep us on track. I know we have some people leaving early, so we need to get going on our pieces here. All right, so while we were, before we broke, we talked about the attachment 1 and our small group activity. What we'd like to do right now, though, is let you have some time to look at the document, look at the worksheet, and start jotting down some notes before we break you into small groups.
And so we're going to give you 10 minutes at your seats to review attachment 1 and fill out the worksheet as much as possible before you meet into groups. But before we do that, are there any questions about the addendum attachment 1 or the activity? All right, so seeing no questions, I'm going to go ahead and give you 10 minutes on the clock to review attachment 1 and make some notes on your worksheet. Thank you. All right, folks, thank you very much for taking part in that process. We just want to make sure that we get some information on that worksheet. We also, as you noticed on the worksheet that we asked you for your stakeholder group, we just want to be sure to know the perspective, the lens that you're looking at this document from as a stakeholder in the LCAP development process. So now we are going to bring you to the floor to have a small group discussion about attachment 1, the prototype. And we have 4 tables down on the floor for us. We're going to go ahead and let you break into your own small groups. And we will give you 20 minutes for discussing the attachment, and we'll ask you to report out, so please identify the person you would like to report out for your group. But yes, so please join us out on the floor, and we'll have that discussion on attachment 1. Or you just need your attachment 1. Bring attachment 2 as well. You should have that one as well. We'll begin that activity just after this first activity. So please come down to the floor so we can have a small group discussion regarding attachment 1. Testing, testing. Looks like it's working. Okay, folks, so I want to clarify something. 3 tables? 3 tables is good? That's fine. That's good. All right, so I just wanted to clarify something. Folks have been moving ahead to attachment 2, and let me just reiterate what the difference is between attachment 1 and attachment 2. Attachment 1 is the prototype, right? It includes all of the features that we want to include in the LCAP addendum, but it's not necessarily formatted in the way we would like it formatted for people to use, right? You wouldn't be able to fill in attachment 1. And so attachment 2 includes all of the features of attachment 1, but formatted in a way that will be fillable for people that are using it during the pilot. Does that make sense?
So when you think about my multi-step journey, attachment 1 was the step preceding attachment 2, right? So we want to spend some time in attachment 1 thinking about the whole and how that works with LCAP. And then we'll look at the design features of attachment 2 to help think about what this might look like to make it accessible and friendly. Does that make sense? So for now, we're just in attachment 1. And we will be collecting, as you're talking and chatting and sharing notes and taking notes and preparing to report out, we will be collecting these handouts because our graphic designer wants to hear about what was liked and not liked, and we need to think about if we need to make changes to attachment 1 and 2. So just bear that in mind.
Okay, so we're going to give you 20 minutes to be able to discuss at your tables, and then we'll ask the groups to report out. Testing, testing. All right, group. Very good conversations happening, very good questions. We are very pleased to hear how you're taking this in. So right now we'd like to have the groups report out. Which table would like to go first? Volunteers?
Since we're still deep in confusion, I want to go first. Actually, I should have gone last. That's right. It was partly because Barbara was sitting here because we got into peppering her with questions and not coming to answers soon enough. So on the template, what features do you like? I think once we got clear, and I am a little bit speaking for the group here, so feel free to pipe up, but that this is way easier to understand than your initial working document. So for example, one of the questions I had is, how are you going to write everything you need to write in the columns on this? And I realized that was a moot point because that was not the intent. So I think this is easy to complete if this is the form, if this is a direction you're going. It's way easier than what we currently do to capture how our federal dollars are being spent with the plans that we now submit. A question that we had at our table is, where does the budget, where do the actual dollars get captured that are being designated for each of these, in each of these areas, for each of the provisions? And I know that they may be in the LCAP. They may not be in the LCAP, but I think we're going to have LEAs say where they are, schools say where they are. Let me see if I can maybe hit one more question here that we may have had semi-consensus on, group. There was just for my part anyway, asking what level of, could we get to a point of even greater synthesis with the LCAP with this, so that it's not a separate, though easier, but separate process that you have to go through to complete this. And I understand that there are reasons that the answer may be no to that, and some of that was explained, that LEA plans, LCAP plans don't come to the state. These need to come to the state, that there will be people who want to see specifically how your federal dollars are being utilized without having to sift through the LCAP to try to glean that. So overall, you're good job, team. You're on the right track. And there are just questions about accountability, transparency, and Kim has way more that I hope she's writing down right now.
Thank you. Very good comments, very helpful questions. Next group. Volunteer, volunteer. Yeah, yeah. All right. Do you have a spokesperson?
So our group was very similar to your group, Karen. I think for us, one thing we were just talking about right at the end, similar to the LCAPs where you were able to see greater collaboration on the business side and the curriculum instruction side. In the larger districts, you may have an individual who's writing on the ESSA side in this case and the LCAPs, and we think there's going to be greater collaboration occurring. So like Karen said, feel like we're moving in the right direction. How far can we push it to synthesize it to one document, recognizing it, there's going to be some degree of separation, but the real test is going to be in the practice. I think our feedback to you will be even greater once we get into the application of this new form.
All right, I would be glad to speak for the group. Let's see. I think actually the time we spent was actually a lot on asking questions about the document more than coming up with any responses or one succinct response or feedback. Lots of questions. So the questions came around in 3 themes. Before I even share the themes, I'll say that we spent the first bit just with appreciation for the amount of time and work and effort that have been put into that first addendum, which feels like a bit of a crosswalk. Everything's put into it so that you can really see how the components play together. So I think that was we all very much appreciated that. The questions came around with 3 themes. One is, how is this meant to be used? who's the inputter, who's the reviewer, how does it, where do the documents get linked? And I know that's part of the template discussion, but it was really, for me anyway, I'll speak for myself, I was getting tripped up in thinking about feedback without knowing how it was supposed to be used. So that was a question that we started to really grapple with. Second, we talked about supplement and supplant, and how it's so part of the current process, and then, in terms of the compliance review, but how will that look in terms of this review? Again, just questions more than anything. And the third theme was around budget. How is it incorporated here? And it sounds like it currently is being thought of as a separate process, but what will that look like? And again, in order to give feedback on this one, we thought, how will that look? So it was a lot of questions revealing. Is that captured? Yeah. All right, thank you.
All right, that was very useful feedback, and definitely enough for us to take back and think about what features to include in this piloting of the document. So now we're going to change our focus to the attachment 2, which some of the discussion that you've already had addresses the second attachment. And the second attachment is really just the formatting of the prototype. So taking the provisions and putting them into a format where somebody would actually fill this out. And so you notice there, all of the provisions are not included in this. We just wanted to provide kind of a sample of how this would look. And we also wanted to note some of the differences in these features. So the directions are pretty much the same. There is a spot to say which programs apply to you, a spot for you to include a link to your LCAP if you're referring to it. And then there is a provision per page. Now, on the number 1 provision for Title I, Part A, you'll notice that there is a state priority alignment box at the top. Not all provisions have state priority alignment boxes. You'll notice that in the prototype as well. Now, our group of district and county office staff helped us to create those alignment. If you have suggestions about any way we can further align the provisions, we would definitely be interested in hearing that. So, but you'll notice that on this attachment 2, not every provision has a state priority alignment. And that was really because it wasn't clear to us if that provision may be met in an LCAP just based on the state priorities. That doesn't mean that an LEA cannot refer to their LCAP if that provision is met. They would still have that option to do it because they may address that provision in their LCAP. So, and then another piece that is different about these samples, you'll notice that there is a 4th option to address a provision, and that's not applicable. And that's based on ESSA language, local planning requirements. Some of these requirements are not going to be applicable to all LEAs, and so that option is there if it is available. And are there any other differences? And that is really all of the differences that you'll see in those provisions. And so right now, we'll take some time to review attachment 2, have discussion at your tables. How long?
Not too long, because I think most groups went into it.
Right, right.
But I think the things we'd really like you to think about here are kind of the usability of this document. Like, what does it look like, right? Like, is there extraneous information on this page that maybe you don't need? Do you need more information to be, so this is more of a usability. The first one was kind of, here's what we've got to cover. But this one is more, how does this feel? How does this look? How would you approach this? And just get some kind of usability feedback that we can provide our graphics designer to maybe think about moving things around. Does it seem cluttered? Does it seem like, how would you approach it?
All right, so I think we'll, oh, good. Question?
Are you going to give us time to have feedback already, or?
So we're going to give you time to talk at your table, just about in case people didn't get to that in the first discussion. So we'll give you about 10 minutes to discuss attachment 2, discuss the questions that are on the worksheet, and then we'll have a group report out. Are there any other questions? Thank you. All right, I think we are ready for some group report outs on this conversation, and I think what we'll do, we'll reverse the order of group report outs. So we'll start on this side of the room. Some brief comments about your review of attachment 2.
Our group liked these forms very much, thought they were streamlined and easy to use. We had some minor feedback on format. For example, most likely various areas would align to multiple LCAP goals versus single goals. In some areas, it may align to the entire LCAP plan. So there are just some things to work out, but we like the format.
So in looking at the document, there's page numbers. It says how ESSA provision is addressed by your LEA, and you can put LCAP in the page number. However, for the ESSA, it says the section, but it doesn't give you a page number. Now, I know you don't necessarily want to read the entire document, but if it had a link to the specific, the corresponding page in the ESSA document, and or having a hover feature, so like a drop down, because it says, in another example, like, section 111, what does the language say? So having hover or drop down.
That is excellent feedback and would make it a little easier to use. Who's reporting out?
I don't know if we have, do we have anything new to add?
Anything?
I mean, with Joanna's remarks.
They align themselves with Joanne's remarks. All right. Okay, so are there any other questions about this document, about the process? We definitely appreciate your feedback, and we are excited to share this with you. You're actually the first group who has seen these documents. And so our next steps are really to develop that pilot process. If you are interested in volunteering, you could definitely let us know, but we'll probably be sending out formal communication about that. So before we do, let's go ahead and get up back to the dais for public comment. And if you could give me your worksheets, please, and make sure your name and stakeholder group is on there. That will help us with our analysis of the feedback.
Okay, so if we can make our way back up here, we can open for public comment on this item.
Madam Chair, we have one person, one public comment, Lisa Gwilyn.
Okay.
The kids. I really appreciate this example of the work that I know that has been ongoing for some time, because I've talked with some LEAs who've been reminding me, that this is going to happen soon. There's going to be this alignment between the LEA plan and how we are spending our funds for the federal dollars and how that links to what we're saying in the LCAP. As you probably know and have already experienced, there is a lot of, there's some LCAP fatigue that we're running into, and a lot of discouraged parents and community stakeholders because there's so much to learn. It's different when you get paid to do it during the day, and when you're volunteering, it can be very overwhelming. So I really appreciate that we're trying to streamline and go slowly. Having said that, I have a couple of questions that I think would be important that we could share with our stakeholders, community partners, organizations of parents and students. What will be the process for selecting the pilot districts? I hope that it will be those districts that have active school site councils, and that those groups will be encouraged to participate as well. And will the volunteer districts be limited in number, or are you aiming for a particular number? And if you address your, I'm sorry, I can't read my own notes. It's pretty bad. But anyway, there are probably some questions that I think parent groups and parents themselves will have. And we will do our best to, of course, coordinate with this effort. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional public comment?
Can I make a brief comment,
Sure.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Thank you. I just want to thank the CPAG for incredibly great feedback on this process. And to the idea of LCAP fatigue that I think we're all experiencing throughout the state, locally, and at the county office level, it's probably important also for us just to keep reflecting back to where we were 5 or 6 years ago, when we had 40 categorical programs that we were reporting out on, and that we were generating the paperwork on all individually, and compare where we're at now. And also think about the incredibly heavy lift that we've undertaken as a state when we adopted the LCFF. And we asked every single one of our LEAs to engage in a very intensive strategic planning process called LCAP. And then on top of that, to engage with stakeholders and really to do things that many of them hadn't really done before, and how far everyone has come. And as evidence of what we can do when we all kind of put our shoulders into these kinds of tasks, this task is going to be pretty similar, because we've been accustomed in the state of California to thinking about our federal funds and our state funds, right? And in fact, some of our people have been instructed, if you're working in federal funds, don't mess with your state funds. And if you're working in state, don't mess with your federal. Now we're talking about and trying to get to a place where we're integrating this together, and it's going to require a lot of thinking. But I think ultimately, if we also reflect on the fact that, under NCLB, many of our LEAs did not change their LEA plans for many years. So there was the one time of the plan development. So a lot of us have forgotten the lift that was involved in developing the LEA plan at the beginning of NCLB, what that was like. So the question really is for our LEAs is, first of all, I think we also need to keep in mind that if you're not receiving federal dollars, you don't have to worry about the LEA plan part of this. But if you are, LEA plans are not going to be optional, right? They're going to have to be done one way or another. So the question is, do we want to do it the old way, which was, literally the 700-pager, or do we want to do it in a way that's tied in? And I think, it's tremendously exciting to see this progress take place. But we're going to need a lot of great thinking, like what went on here earlier, and going forward to be able to do this. And so we're just in the initial stages, and it's pretty exciting, but it's going to be a lot of work.
I think the one thing we all share in common in our comments was a great appreciation for attempts to streamline these processes and keep the focus on planning and continuous improvement, and not a distraction with onerous processes that surround planning. So thank you for all of your efforts to do that. We appreciate it. Look forward to seeing how the pilot goes. So I think we're ready to move on to item 2. I believe, finally, item 2, right? If we count the CPAG way, that means we're almost at the end of the meeting. So this is the item on identifying the lowest performing 5% of schools. I think Jenny Singh is here.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank all the staff that rearranged their schedule to accommodate me today. So I really do appreciate that. So again, my name is Jenny Singh, and I am going to be talking about the identification of the lowest the lowest performing 5%. So we'll start off with a little bit of background, which I'm sure you are all aware of. You know that ESSA does require that the state accountability system must develop an approach that will identify the lowest performing 5% of Title I schools. These are Title I schools only. We have to identify schools for comprehensive support. That's going to be based on their overall school performance. And then we'll identify schools for targeted support, which is based on the performance of the student groups. So consistently underperforming student groups must include at least any student group in a Title I school that on its own would not meet the criteria for being in the bottom 5% of Title I schools. So we're going to be taking the same criteria that we apply at the school level and apply it at the student group level to identify the consistently underperforming student groups. ESSA also requires that the approach to identify schools for the comprehensive and targeted support have much greater weight in the aggregate to academic indicators. And we consider the student test scores, the progress of English learners, graduation rates, and chronic absenteeism in the category of academic indicators. So when you combine all of our indicators together in the aggregate, the academic indicators do have more weight. So we have some options that we want to present to you for identifying the lowest 5%. And these options are based on feedback that we have received from educational stakeholders and from our technical design group. These 4 options for identifying the lowest performing 5% are being included in an April memo, which is due to be posted by tomorrow. We're hoping by the end of the day, but at the very latest by tomorrow. And I'm going to be presenting those 4 options that are included in that in the board memo today. So I'm going to go through the options and then I'll give you some examples of the options. So option 1 is going to look at the performance levels on all applicable indicators with English language arts and math as separate indicators. That's how they're currently reported on our dashboard, as separate indicators. So you can see the down here, they're going to be treated as separate indicators and they'll have their own separate performance category. Option 2 will look at the performance level on all applicable indicators with ELA and mathematics combined into one indicator, which is consistent with the criteria for LEA technical assistance under LCFF. So you may recall that under LCFF, student groups have to miss for academics, they're either red on both ELA and math or red on one and orange on the other. So we're looking at, we're combining those two, we're combining ELA and math together when we're looking for identifying LEAs. Option 3 will look at the performance levels on all applicable indicators, but provide more or less weighting to one or more indicators using the same methodology as option 1 and 2. We're just going to weight the indicators differently. So you can see here one example is that you could go ahead and weight one of the indicators less. So in this example, suspension rate is weighted is half weight compared to the other indicators. And in the other example, you could say, well, we want to go ahead and weigh ELA and math, give them a double weight, and you can do that. So you can't really do any simulations until you make up your mind which ones you want to either weight more heavily or weight less, because it's always going to produce different results. And then option 4, which is a little bit different than your handout, because I wanted to make sure that we kept with indicators for elementary. We're going to look at, you can look at the performance levels for one or more indicators to establish a pool of eligible schools, and then move on to the other indicators. So if you picked ELA and math, you would identify your pool and then shrink the pool down based on the other indicators. So we have to remember that there is variability among schools because schools must have at least 30 or more students to receive a performance level or color. Not all schools receive an indicator, a color for each indicator. And of course, there are some indicators that are only applied to elementary schools and other indicators that are only apply to high schools. And then of course, those K-12 schools, they get all the indicators. So we have schools that have a performance level up to 5 indicators, and they're listed here. I'm sure you're all familiar with them by now. Suspension rate, the English learner progress, grad rate, ELA, and math. And of course, we have a couple indicators that will be coming on later That's the college and career indicator in chronic absenteeism. So you could have an elementary school that may have a performance level for only 3 indicators: suspension rate, ELA, and math. Their English learner student population may not have 30 students in it, so they wouldn't receive an LP. You may have a high school that will only have 2 indicators: suspension and graduation. Okay. So remember that the grade 11 English language arts and math is included in the CCI. So they don't have an academic indicator per se, and the CCI, we will not have a fully operational CCI until the fall of 2018. So the methodologies for option 1, 2, and 3 do take into consideration that different schools receive different performance levels on a different number of indicators. So therefore, the performance of a school with only 2 indicators is treated similarly to a school with a performance of 5 indicators. You don't want to set up a system where schools that have 5 indicators get identified first just because they have the most indicators. You want it to be fair across all the schools. So for example, 1 and 2, we have a school that has 2. So if you have a school that has 2 indicators in which the performance levels are red, that school is going to be identified first for support over a school that has 3 indicators, and then they have 2 reds and an orange. Because what we're looking at the number of indicators that a school has, and we're saying, are all of those indicators red? We're going to identify all the reds first. And then we're going to move from all reds to all but 1 red, and then all but 2 reds. And then, so that's the way this system is set up. So for this instance, this school A, they've got 2 indicators, and they're red on both indicators, red on 100% of their indicators. They would again get identified before a school that has 3 indicators that have 2 reds and an orange.
And for now, it's for the entire population, not yet by subgroup.
This is for the entire population. Yes. So option 3 is a little bit different if you're going to be weighting. So depending on how you weight, it will have an impact on how schools are selected. So you can see here that if you have ELA and math, and they're double weighted, in essence, you really have 6 indicators. The easy way to put this out there. So in this first case, school A, they're red in 4 out of 6 indicators because we double weighted ELA and math. They're counting twice. And then for school B, now they're also red on 2 indicators, but they're red on the indicators that are not double weighted. So they will get identified after school A and B, which is not the case in option 1 and option 2. They would be treated the same. So option 4, we're using a progressive selection process. So of course, that could result in some indicators not contributing to a school being identified. So you can see here that if we have an elementary school, they have ELA and math, and we've identified 235 schools, and we only need to identify 298. So if we identify 235 in ELA and math, and we move on to the LP, and we identify another 63, we're at 298, and we never move on to chronic absenteeism or to suspension rates. So they get identified solely on the first 2 indicators because our pool isn't as large as you might think it would be. So remember, we're only doing on Title I schools, and we're also removing high schools that are at the 67% graduation rate or below. They are automatically identified, and we take them out of the counts before we determine the 5% of schools. So other considerations that we might want to think about in our conversation today is that ESSA does require states to develop a single academic indicator. We have separated ours out into ELA and math because we think it's important to show progress in both of those areas. And of course, in addition, LCFF criteria that the board has adopted for identifying LEAs for technical assistant combines both ELA and math results. So those are some things you might want to keep into consideration as we go through our discussion. So, it might be nice if you talked to a partner about how you would rank order these 4 options, and then maybe even come up with some pros and cons for each of these methodologies. And then we can report out, and we will take that to the board. I think 5 minutes? Is 5 minutes sufficient? 5 minutes? Okay. Are there any questions before we start?
But how many schools aren't Title I, and how many of those have red categories? Like how many schools are we not looking at here was one question I have, and then how many schools have a graduation rate below 67%? Or what percentage?
So I'm gonna try to remember the percentage of Title I schools, but I think when we talk about Title I schools, we're talking of close to 70% of schools in the state are Title I, between I think 68 and 70%. And someone did tell me the number of schools that got identified. Remember that we have two separate systems though, and right now we're only identifying those schools that are traditional schools. Alternative schools will have their own separate system and they'll get identified under that. I think the number was around between 45 and 50 that have that below the 67%. Of course, when we go to alternative schools, that number will increase, but we haven't looked at them yet. Oh, I'm sorry, did I say percent? No, you didn't. No, yes, it's between 45 and 50 schools total. 45 and 50 schools. I think it's 47, but I'm not exactly positive. Okay, so I've told that we could take up to 10 minutes for our discussion if there aren't any more questions. Okay. Oh.
One other question. The slide here where you talk about other considerations and saying that ESSA requires districts to have a single academic indicator, and that under LCFF we do have that for technical assistant. Does that imply that we must have a single indicator for this selection of the lowest 5%? Or not?
I think that we want to do what we think is the most appropriate thing to do here in California, and we'll put that in our application, and if we need to apply for a waiver, we will. I think it's a little unclear in the legislation. The regulations were very clear, but the regulations are no longer intact.
Do we have any data on what percentage of our schools, are red on both versus red on one?
I don't recall, but I can tell you that we don't have enough schools that are red on all their indicators to meet the 5%. I think so. If I remember correctly,
good news. That's good news.
Yeah, that is very good news. So I think we could only get up to like 1.5% or 2% with all reds.
Very good news.
So that's good news.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Still thinking?
So is the understanding that whatever option we choose, that option becomes, I think, linked to Linda's question, that becomes our single, in many ways, ranking metric. So if we pick one that says 66% or 100% of red or whatever it is, that becomes the single measure in many ways, right? I mean, I'm trying to think about, you could rank technically all the schools in the state using whatever one of these options.
That is correct.
And say that is our measure of, whether we like it or not, we're being forced to actually ultimately come up with a way of force ranking the schools.
That is correct. It certainly could be used for ranking. The state board has indicated they do not want to go through a ranking process, but it certainly could be used, and I'm sure people out there will do that. And remember, we have to use that same criteria for identifying the 5% to identify those schools that have the consistently underperforming student groups.
If I can make one more comment, I was just looking at the example under option 4, showing that you will get to the number of schools required if you use English language arts and math and the English learner progress indicators. Well, don't even need to touch the fact that there's a chronic absenteeism or suspension issue. That doesn't preclude, however, that once these schools are part of the intervention, that in fact, if the chronic absenteeism is what's driving the lower performance, or the suspension rate is creating a culture where kids are, not engaged in school, et cetera, that those things could and would be addressed appropriately. Is that correct?
That is correct. Of course, it also means that, so just to say this, that means that we're valuing some indicators more than others if we do that. And the same way if we do weighting, we're adding value to some indicators over other indicators.
Thank you.
So, I mean, what do you, I'm kind of thinking one and, I mean, even three. I think this one where you end up basically coming down to a
Hello? Okay. Okay, if we can come back together. It sounds like you were having quite a good conversation, so I'm quite anxious to hear what you have to say about the 4 options. Is there anyone who would like to volunteer first?
We thought 4 was too complicated for anybody to really completely understand. So putting that 4 aside, we like the calling out ELA and math separately. We believe it's important not to weigh them together because it gives too little importance, particularly once you also, in elementary, you take ag graduation rates and stuff like that. It really counts too little. So separate. So then so that leaves 1 and 3. And between 1 and 3, at least this tiny little group here thought that 3 with the ability, because suspension, right, there's a lot of self-reporting on suspensions, and there's right now a lot of gaming on that indicator. While important, we would like to downgrade it a little bit. We like the idea of a 0.5, so people would have less of an incentive of gaming to get out of the 5% by gaming the suspension rate. So 1 or 3, I guess.
So this just before we started talking together, we were going to put our heads together because I was pretty sure we were all thinking the same thing, but we weren't. So I want to go back to, almost a year ago when a statement was made by, when we were first looking at the ESSA plan that said, it is not the California way. We want to make sure that all indicators are highly valued. We want to put a stake in the ground and not valuing academic over some of these other indicators, which really, to me, indicates what the California way is, because not every state will look at these local indicators that we have or other measures that we are factoring into our assessment system. And, to those of us who've been doing this for a while, we often hear, we pay attention to what we assess. That's why a lot of groups want to make sure that there's a history test or a test on any particular subject area that is valued. And I think that the same applies to indicators, that if things get more heavily weighted, then there may be a tendency to say, yeah, we'll get to that if we can, parent engagement or suspension rate, chronic absenteeism in this case, if it's less highly weighted, we may not focus on that as much as we do ELA and math. And certainly under NCLB, we saw ELA and math be the dominant subject areas, the dominant areas of focus, because it's what got counted. So. One.
I think you did a great job, Karen, making the points. I guess one question I had, and this, in looking across the options, is how do we think about elementary, middle, and high schools differently? Because there are a different number of indicators, at least certainly in the short term, while the CCR isn't up yet, that, to get to the bottom 5%, do we pull a bunch from each grade span school, I guess, to make sure that one group of schools is not so heavily impacted just by the number of indicators that they have?
So you're correct. There are 2 options here for identifying the 5%. Just identify the lowest 5% without consideration to grade span, or identifying 5% in each grade span, 5% in elementary, middle, and high. And that will be a decision that the board will have to make. Based on the indicators we have now, we did some preliminary runs because we were doing the PLAS list, the persistently lowest achieving schools list several months ago, and it wasn't that different. But as new indicators come on for the high school, it could make a difference. So we would certainly have to make sure we're careful about that.
Just a short addition, we agreed with Karen's reasoning. We were at the same place. We got to number one because we felt like the others maybe were not in the same spirit of treating them all equally, and definitely keeping ELA and math disaggregated separately would be an important way to make sure that that gets honored. One of the things we talked about is where the local indicators, especially in the spirit of LCFF, fit in. We talked about Mr. Price brought up a really interesting idea about even something where the bottom 5% are identified using the general state indicators, and then some sort of an opportunity for local entities to get to respond to who is there with anecdotal evidence or something around what their local control, what their local indicators are. So I know it doesn't make it as clean, but we were wondering about how those get factored in and how the expertise of local schools in thinking about, like the case we talked about was you have a school where you have really put in a dynamic new principal and you know that the change is coming, but you know that they're still lower percent, yet you have another school that needs that attention but may not be quite there. How can local entities help to put voice to this as well? So that was one of the things we wondered.
And I just want to echo Melissa's and Karen's comment. Option 1, to me, I think it's the cleanest for parents to understand. And if anything, I have a question as to why, what's the, I guess, the rationale or the reasoning behind combining math and ELA for LCFF for technical assistance? That's one question. And then the second question is, are we thinking of expanding the categories? Right now we have 5. But eventually, once we have chronic absenteeism and science, is the plan to expand those as well as we have more stable data?
That is correct. We have committed to expanding to chronic absenteeism. We're collecting that data this spring. We don't know exactly when it's going to be implemented. Of course, the soonest we could get a color for chronic absenteeism is the fall of 2018. Which, by the way, is the first time we would identify schools for the lowest performing 5%. We're not required to identify them this fall, but next fall. And then, of course, the state board has committed to science when it comes on board. And I think honestly, I wasn't part of that conversation, but I believe it has to do. We wanted to make sure we took both of the content areas into consideration, because under LCFF, the subgroup has to miss it in 2 priority areas. So if the ELA and math and LP are in 1 priority area, academics. So they wanted to make sure to take those 2 pieces, ELA and math, together, so that so we can capture those LEAs that really do need the most assistance. Any other comments?
Yeah, we had, I think, we agreed with a lot of the concerns, but we ended up in a different place over, I think the 3 of us over here. We were looking at option 4 and talking about it a lot, and then also realized that we liked it, but we still wanted to make a change, and that is to separate out language arts and math. And the comments about and it was a struggle for me too, thinking, we've invested in the idea of multiple measures, and we want to communicate that, but option 4 doesn't weight language arts or math more. It's just probably that the real data is going to come out showing that's where the needs are. And I'm saying that based on right now what you've showed us. My guess is that as we are able to look at the suspension data, the chronic absenteeism data, it's likely to hold up that in fact there are more schools in our state that are struggling in language arts and math, maybe with English learners, than there are that are struggling with chronic absenteeism or suspension rates. So I think option 4 is agnostic. It's not saying one thing is priority. You could have mixed these up in a different order, and my guess is it still would have shown up that language arts and math and English learners are the really struggling areas for our state. And if that's so, then it's appropriate that those get identified, because that's where the need is. The other piece that we brought up, and I don't know if you can do this, but it's certainly, if we look at our data across the state, the two groups that have the longest history of underperformance are English learners and special ed students. But special ed students aren't part of this, and yet they need support and attention, and schools and districts need support in understanding how do I better work with these students. And I'm not sure that that can be part of it, but I think it is certainly a state need that we should figure out how do we recognize the needs, or if it's another underperforming subgroup in the school district, how do we, it may not show up in the overall schools report, but it could be really contributing to some of the difficulties that we're having.
So special ed students are a student group in the accountability system. Schools that have 30 or more we would look at those student groups based on the student group criteria consistently underperforming, and they would get identified there. But remember, at the LEA level under LCFF, it's all based on student groups. And of course, most LEAs do have numerically significant special ed students.
And actually, one of the questions we had here, this identification is schools regardless of what district they're in. It's just schools across the whole state, correct?
It is schools across the whole state, any Title I school.
So anyhow, that's kind of where our thinking evolved.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. Any other comments? According to my notes, number one was the most voted for. Right. So we had 3 groups that voted for 1, 1 group that voted for 3, and 1 group that voted for 4. But the group that voted for 3 said option 1 or 3, if I got that right.
So our conversation, Ed and I said we would have been interested just to see some runs on the data to see how many schools would have come up using the various criteria. But we spoke about wanting to be sure that if the purpose of this is to identify the lowest 5%, that's what we do, and we're not doing something else as an unintended consequence. So the concern with this is that we do end up with schools giving themselves a single number as an indicator, and that it might lends itself then to being able to rank schools, which was a concern, that is not an unintended consequence that happens.
Yes, we want to make sure not to do that, so we're going to take precautions, but we can't control what other entities do with the data.
Well, we said that, of all the options, which would lend itself least to being able to do that. So we talked about option 4.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. This has been very helpful. I really appreciate your input.
Any other comments, questions before Jenny goes generally about?
So looking at the combination of combining the ELA and the math indicators, I'm just looking at it and I just don't see it being equitable in regards to how it's adding up. I mean, I feel like looking at a school as red or orange, it's what are the performance bands? What are the actual numbers saying about that? Are we looking at a school that, for example, has a low red and a high orange? So, I mean, what is that telling us? What is it telling the parents? What is it telling our stakeholders?
And I agree, because I think we ought to steer really clear from any kind of identification that leads us to saying, well, this is a red school, this is an orange school, because it's going to look like it's an A, B, C, D, F school. So the combination, and if that was my school and I had 1 red and 1 orange, and I was called a red school, I'd say, hey, you forgot my orange. I'd be upset about it. So, and also I think we ought to keep the color coding just to the 5x5 tables, and let it be a standalone, and do this based on maybe some priority needs or something. Priority 1 schools, a priority 2, or something like that. Some other way of identifying it, but not calling it by the colors.
So if there was a big consensus about combining both ELA and math, which it doesn't seem like there is, we would come up with multiple options on how to do that. One of them would be to actually take the data, the distance for MET, and combine ELA and math together and do it that way. That might be a more fair way to do it instead of combining colors. But we would certainly come up with multiple options for the board to choose from. But that doesn't seem like that's the consensus here.
I guess my question is more long-term because, ideally when we committed to the 8 priorities and the multiple measures, I was thinking that at some point our, single score would include not just academics, but climate, access to support. So you get a more holistic picture of where your school is at, even though you're still aggregating portions of it. Now that just might be part of what I'm proposing. And I know that we're not there yet because we're still developing or strengthening local indicators. But is this something that we're committing to for now, and then it would evolve in the future to include local academic or local indicators?
So local indicators currently are at the LEA level. The local indicators are meant to be at the LEA level. They're not at the individual student or the individual school level or the student group level. They are reported out at the LEA level. That doesn't mean that schools would not take some of those local indicators and use them to inform their own decision making, but it's not anything that's going to be reported to us here at the state at this time, just at the LEA level. And it is taken into consideration when we identify LEAs for support. And it is my understanding that we are not going to be producing a single score for any schools. Correct. So we would, when we do these calculations, we have to do calculations in order to identify the 5%, but we're not putting out single scores for anyone. Once every 3 years, that is correct.
Other comments, questions? All right, why don't we open up for general public comment on this item?
Yes, Madam Chair, we have one comment from Liz Gwillen.
Hello, Liz Guillen with Public Advocates. This is complicated. We really want to reinforce what some of the members have said, and that this identification process seems to be taking us down another system. And we really think that the single coherent system that we've all been hearing about really needs to be, that this is a place for that to happen. The parents and the public really need a single coherent system, and one that values all of the indicators that we worked so hard, whether they are state or local. It seems like you might need other options, and one could be using the state indicators, using the indicators that have been proposed maybe as a first cut, but then having locals identify, using their local indicators, what needs to have their focus. Not only would that would be more holistic, it would really get away from the ability to rank, which, human beings have this desire to do all the time. But it would also engender more local buy-in to the system generally, and I think have people want to participate in working toward improving these local indicators, which we're all confident relate to some of the academic indicators that others feel are more important. So I think that there should be more exploration. I think option one might be, people have identified option one as the one that gets us closer, but I still think that's not the same as saying that's what we should do. So I appreciate everyone's nod to the fact that there are 8 state priorities and other indicators. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional public comment?
That's all. The public comment.
All right. Okay, folks, we are moving close to the end of our meeting. So this item should go rather quickly. If you have in your stack the minutes from the last meeting, which I'm sure you had an opportunity to read last night. So I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting. Yes, please.
Minor correction, and that's just if we could consider in the adoption of the minutes the addition of Michelle Magyar, who was also amongst the principal staff who were present at the last meeting.
All right, so a motion to approve the minutes with the addition. Karen, do we have a second? Second. Ed, all in favor? Opposed? All right, the minutes are approved. So we'll move on to our last item. Any general comments from CPAG members? Questions? Information you'd like to share? Any general public comment?
Madam Chair, there is one public comment.
Okay.
Maureen.
Hello? Is it on? Can you hear me? Okay. So this is a little probably, yes, as I was going to just say a little bit weird. My name is Maureen McCory. I have been a classroom teacher for close to 25 years. And so it's coincidental that I ended up being here, but I wanted to take an opportunity to raise with other practitioners or people representing practitioners some things that I've noticed in recent years. It's actually one of the reasons why I left teaching about 5 years earlier than I had planned to. I'm a social studies teacher, and I just wanted to really thank you, Ms. Monroe, for bringing up the point that when something isn't identified as a priority, it quickly drops to the bottom of the barrel. And we're in lots of different crisis modes in education right now. Teacher retention is certainly one of them. But I have been a history teacher, a teacher of foreign policy. I actually created my own foreign policy class, a contemporary foreign policy class, so that students would actually be able to discuss what's happening in the news today and have a little bit of an idea about where Syria is on the map and why that matters so much, and also how that ties historically to our past. What's problematic at this time is that those topics are just not in the curriculum, simply not. And I'm going to start with a question that I received from a student who was one of my most skilled students. She asked me as we were beginning a unit on Afghanistan if I would be willing to go ahead and discuss the Nation of Islam, and she meant the nation. She said she really wanted to learn about the country. She's heard a lot about it, and it sounded very important to her. And I had to just take a deep breath. And I wish I could tell you that that was somehow exceptional. She was an exceptional student. She was earnest, she studied hard, but she was at a school that didn't really value social studies. And I've noticed that what's happened in the social studies and the history curriculum in particular, especially with Common Core, as we begin to shift, what we're doing with Common Core right now is that English teachers are now tasked with the important job of teaching the Gettysburg Address or teaching what we would consider to be non-fictional materials, and not really having a context for that. So a way a history teacher might teach the Gettysburg Address, whether that's a little bit different than an English teacher is really important. So that's something to consider. And then finally, just the elevation of the College Board and advanced placement as being the only really truly quality education and an indicator of success. So I taught at Palo Alto High School. For 13 years, I taught at San Jose. I taught in the San Jose Unified School District.
Time.
3 years. And I just want to say that that's such an important point. I know you're trying to leave. I've never addressed a public meeting before at the end when everybody wants to get the heck out of here. But I would encourage people to take a look at what your schools are doing around history, social studies, and if we don't have solid evidence as to why that's important at this moment in time, I'm pretty sure we never will. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. We all feel your passion for teaching and appreciate your passion for teaching, and thank you for your comment. So on that note, if no one has any final comments, Glenn, any final comments?
Well, since you asked, I just want to say thank you to all of you. I found the day extremely interesting, stimulating, and inspiring, and just you all just revalidated why it is that we have a California Practitioners Advisory Group. We're so much richer now for the input and advice that you provided, not just to the department or the state board, but really to all of us as California moving forward. So hope you take a lot of satisfaction in your work today and what you've been doing so far, and have a great trip home.
I think each time we come, it's just so exciting, right? We see this puzzle coming together and the pieces being filled in and the image becoming clear. And I think when we first heard about all of that, that was almost inconceivable. But it's really happening and it's working, and it's very exciting and exciting to be a part of it. So thank you all around the table. Meeting is officially adjourned.